It was a normal Tuesday morning. Elon Musk sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto, California, staring at the ocean of emails and tasks piling up before him. The weight of his responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. Tesla's latest quarterly report was about to be released, and SpaceX had a crucial rocket launch scheduled for next month. These were just the latest in a long string of monumental challenges he faced daily. He was used to the pressure, but something about this day felt different. His phone buzzed on the desk, an anonymous message flashing across the screen. The text was cryptic, simple, but unsettling. "The world needs you now more than ever. Are you ready for what comes next?" Elon frowned, his fingers hovering over the screen. It wasn't a number he recognized, and the message seemed oddly personal. He had thousands of people reaching out to him every day, most with offers or ideas that didn't interest him. But this felt different, something he couldn't quite shake off. Maybe it was the words, the gravity of them. Maybe it was the sense that they came at a time when he was already at the brink of burnout. Or perhaps, deep down, he knew that a shift was coming. But, as he did with most things that demanded his attention, he pushed it aside. "Probably just another one of those random fan messages," he muttered to himself as he closed his phone. He needed to focus on the upcoming milestones. But before he could return to his work, another buzz broke his concentration. This time, it was from his assistant. "Elon, there's a call from NASA on line 2. They're eager to discuss the upcoming Mars mission." Without hesitation, Elon hit the speakerphone. The conversation about the Mars mission was important, but his mind kept drifting back to the message. Who could it have been? And why did it feel like something more than a coincidence? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Later that day, as Elon stood at his desk, preparing for another round of meetings, a second message arrived. His curiosity was piqued now. It read, "Time is running out. Don't ignore the signs." He stared at the words for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh it off or to feel unnerved. What kind of person would send such ominous, yet oddly accurate, messages? His instinct told him to dig deeper, but the rational part of his mind told him it was probably just a prank. But with Elon Musk, there was always that part of him that wondered. Was this the beginning of something much bigger than he could imagine? He quickly shot off a text to his close friend and confidant, J.B. Straubel, his co-founder at Tesla. "Have you heard anything strange today? Any odd messages or signs?" The reply came quickly, "Not that I know of, but let me know if you need anything." Elon sat back, contemplating. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just the stress getting to him. Still, something about the way these messages arrived felt too precise, too coincidental to dismiss entirely. And the timing. It couldn't have been more perfect for a turning point in his life. Elon Musk had always believed in taking risks, in following his gut, even when logic told him to turn back. The day dragged on, and by the evening, the unsettling feeling still gnawed at him. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a sense of urgency flooded him, like something was calling him to change, to act, to step beyond his comfort zone. Perhaps he wasn't just supposed to be building rockets or electric cars. Maybe, just maybe, there was something greater at stake, something far beyond his current ambitions. As he closed his eyes, a thought lingered. Could this be the moment everything shifts? Could this be why everything he had done up until now, everything he had built, was leading to something far more significant than he could have ever predicted? For the first time in years, Elon Musk found himself uncertain. The weight of the future felt even heavier than it ever had before. Elon Musk had never been one to settle for mediocrity. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, on June 28, 1971, he grew up with a curious mind and a relentless drive to understand how the world worked. His parents, May and Errol Musk, were both intellectuals, but their relationship was anything but conventional. His father, a brilliant but often distant engineer, and his mother, a model and dietitian, had a complicated marriage that eventually ended in divorce when Elon was just 9. Despite the upheaval in his home life, May Musk remained a constant pillar of support, always nurturing her son's insatiable thirst for knowledge. From an early age, Elon displayed an aptitude for technology. At age 10, he taught himself programming, creating a video game called Blaster, which he sold to a magazine for $500. That small taste of success gave him the confidence to keep pushing boundaries, and he soon realized that the world had so much more to offer, if he could only figure out how to tap into it. His teenage years, however, were far from easy. Elon was bullied relentlessly at school, his gangly frame and intense focus making him an easy target. It was during these tough years that Elon began to retreat into books, diving into science fiction novels and biographies of inventors and entrepreneurs. He found solace in the stories of people who had changed the world, who had faced immense odds and succeeded in ways that no one thought possible. But his most important relationship was with his mother. Musk was the one who always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. She saw his potential long before anyone else did, pushing him to follow his dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. It was May who encouraged him to move to Canada at the age of 17 to attend Queen's University, a decision that would set him on the path to the future he would one day create. She was the anchor that kept him grounded when everything around him seemed chaotic. At Queen's, Elon quickly realized that he was out of his element. His classmates were more social, more comfortable in the traditional academic setting. But Elon was driven by something much bigger than the pursuit of grades. He had a vision of a future where technology could elevate humanity, where humanity could transcend Earth and explore the stars. After 2 years at Queen's, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied both economics and physics, 2 disciplines that would serve as the foundation for his future endeavors. It was during these years that Elon began to shape his ambitious plans for the world. He was no longer content to simply learn about technology. He wanted to build it, to create the innovations that would change the world. His first major venture came in 1995, when he dropped out of Stanford University after just 2 days, choosing instead to dive headfirst into the emerging internet revolution. Along with his brother Kimball, Elon founded Zip2, a company that provided online business directories for newspapers. The venture was a success, and in 1999, Compaq purchased Zip2 for nearly $300 million. Elon was 27 years old and had his first taste of success, but it was far from enough for him. He wasn't interested in just building a business. He wanted to build the future. From there, Elon went on to create X.com, an online payment company that would later become PayPal. PayPal revolutionized the way people transferred money online, and in 2002, eBay acquired the company for $1.5 billion in stock. With the proceeds, Elon set his sights on something much bigger: space. He believed humanity's future depended on becoming a multiplanetary species, and he wasn't content to wait for someone else to make it happen. If he was going to change the world, he would have to do it himself. His mother's voice echoed in his mind as he sat at the helm of his various ventures, reminding him that anything was possible if he stayed true to his vision. But even with his monumental success in Silicon Valley, Elon knew there was a price to pay for greatness. His relationships with his family, friends, and romantic partners had always been strained by his obsessive dedication to his work. He was, by nature, a man who lived in the future, often neglecting the present moment. The demands of his companies left little room for anything else, and as much as he hated to admit it, he often pushed those closest to him away. There had been times, especially during the early days of Tesla and SpaceX, when it seemed like everything might crumble. Tesla was on the brink of bankruptcy, and SpaceX had failed multiple rocket launches. His critics were vocal, declaring that Elon was too idealistic, that his dreams were unrealistic, and that he would never achieve the monumental goals he had set for himself. But Elon Musk had always thrived on proving people wrong. His unwavering belief in his vision, in the power of innovation to change the world, was his driving force. And now, years later, it was clear that the world was beginning to take notice. But even with all his success, there were still moments of doubt. When he was alone, away from the spotlight, Elon often questioned whether he was doing the right thing. He had seen the sacrifices it took to get this far: the late nights, the endless hours of work, the toll on his health and personal life. Was it worth it? Was it all leading to something bigger than just his own ambition? As Elon sat in his office that afternoon, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point, a thought crossed his mind. Perhaps this strange message he'd received earlier was more than just a coincidence. Perhaps it was a sign, an invitation to something greater, something beyond his current understanding. For the first time in years, Elon Musk felt the stirrings of uncertainty. The kind of uncertainty that comes when the path ahead is not clear, when the road you're walking takes an unexpected turn. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the kind of person to ignore a challenge, no matter how daunting. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, launches, and public appearances. Elon Musk's life was a whirlwind of high-stakes decisions and relentless pressure. Tesla was pushing the boundaries of electric vehicles, and SpaceX was preparing for another ambitious mission to the International Space Station. But despite the outward success, the pressure was beginning to build in ways he hadn't anticipated. The world was watching, and the expectations were suffocating. One evening, as Elon sat at his desk, reviewing the latest Tesla quarterly report, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell, president of SpaceX. His heart sank as he read her words. "We've lost the Falcon 9 rocket. The launch was a failure. There's a significant issue with the second stage." He sat frozen for a moment, the weight of the message sinking in. This wasn't just a technical issue. It was a monumental setback. SpaceX had been on the cusp of something big. They were closer than ever to achieving their goal of making space travel more affordable and sustainable. But now, all of that was in jeopardy. Elon immediately picked up the phone and dialed Gwynne. "Elon, I wish I had better news. We've got a serious problem. This is going to set us back months, maybe even years," she said, her voice tinged with frustration and exhaustion. "I know," Elon replied, rubbing his temples. "We'll fix it. We always fix it. Let's get everyone together and figure out what went wrong." But deep down, he knew this wasn't just another obstacle. This failure felt different. The critics were already sharpening their knives, ready to pounce on the first sign of weakness. The pressure to succeed was overwhelming, and it was becoming harder to keep up the facade of invincibility that he had worked so hard to build. As if the news from SpaceX wasn't enough, Tesla was facing its own set of challenges. A series of production delays had caused the company to miss critical deadlines, and the stock price had taken a significant hit. Elon's inbox was flooded with angry messages from investors, demanding answers and threatening to pull their funding. The media was having a field day, painting him as a visionary who had failed to deliver. And then, to top it all off, the electric car market was becoming increasingly competitive. Major automakers like Ford and General Motors were ramping up their own electric vehicle programs, and the pressure to stay ahead of the curve was mounting. Elon couldn't help but feel that the dream he had spent so many years building was slowly slipping away. That night, he sat alone in his office, staring at the reports in front of him. The once immense optimism he had felt about the future was now clouded by self-doubt. He had always believed that failure was just a stepping stone, a necessary part of the journey. But this time, it felt different. This time, failure threatened to derail everything. Elon's phone buzzed again. It was a message from his brother, Kimball. "Hey, I'm here if you want to talk. Don't carry all of this alone." He read the message and hesitated for a moment. Kimball had always been there for him, even when their relationship had been strained. They had fought in the past, but deep down, Elon knew that his brother was one of the few people who understood him. He was the one person who had seen the toll that the constant pressure had taken on him. Elon picked up the phone and called him. "Hey man," Kimball answered. "How's everything going?" Elon leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the darkened skyline. "It's not good, Kimball. Everything is falling apart. SpaceX had a failure today, and Tesla is in trouble. I don't know if I can fix it this time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Look, I know it's hard, but you've been through worse, right? You've faced worse setbacks than this. You've always found a way to bounce back. Don't give up now." Elon let out a deep sigh. He knew his brother was right. He had been through failure before, and each time, he had come out stronger on the other side. But this time felt different. This time, the stakes were higher, and the world was watching. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," Elon admitted. "I'm exhausted, Kimball. I don't know how much longer I can keep going." Kimball's voice softened. "You don't have to do it alone. You've got people who believe in you, and you've got to believe in yourself. Remember why you started this. Remember what you're fighting for." Elon nodded, even though his brother couldn't see it. He knew Kimball was right. He had started this journey not for fame or fortune, but for something bigger, something that could change the world. But in that moment, the weight of the responsibility felt suffocating. The next morning, Elon woke up with a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't going to let failure define him. He had come too far, and his vision for the future was too important to abandon now. But he knew that in order to move forward, he had to confront his fears head-on. He needed to face the reality of the situation and figure out a way to fix the problems that had arisen. He stood in front of the mirror, looking at his reflection, and for the first time in years, he saw a man who was vulnerable. A man who had been knocked down, but was ready to rise again. The world had thrown its worst at him, but Elon Musk wasn't the kind of person who would give up. Not now. Not ever. He took a deep breath and sent a message to his team at SpaceX. "We've got a long road ahead of us, but we're going to fix this, and we're going to keep pushing. The dream is still alive." As the message went out, Elon felt a sense of resolve settle in. This was just another challenge in a long line of challenges. And no matter how difficult it got, he knew that he couldn't back down. The future was still out there, waiting. He just had to fight for it. Elon thought about that question once again as he sat at his desk. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let the setbacks define him. He would keep going, no matter what. Because if there was one thing he had learned, it was that the greatest achievements often come after the hardest struggles. And he was just getting started. Weeks passed after Elon Musk's crisis moment, but the weight of failure still lingered, clouding his every decision. He had made a vow to push forward, but the path ahead felt daunting. Tesla's production delays had worsened, SpaceX's latest setback had shaken investor confidence, and the public was growing increasingly skeptical of his promises. Elon was no longer just battling for success. He was battling for survival. Every step forward felt like one step away from the precipice. Then, one late afternoon, as Elon sat in his office at Tesla, he received a phone call that would mark the beginning of a monumental turning point. The call came from an unknown number. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something told him to pick up. "Elon?" the voice on the other end said. It was unfamiliar, yet undeniably calm and authoritative. "Who is this?" Elon asked, trying to suppress the unease that rose within him. "This is Dr. Maxwell Carter, head of the Global Space Agency," the voice continued. "We've been following your progress, Mr. Musk. We believe you might be exactly who we need for an upcoming mission." Elon's heart skipped a beat. The Global Space Agency was a secretive international organization responsible for coordinating the efforts of space exploration between private companies, governments, and scientific communities around the world. To be contacted by them directly felt like a monumental shift in his career. "I'm listening," Elon replied. His curiosity piqued. "We've been working on a mission that could change the course of humanity's future. A mission to establish a permanent colony on Mars," Dr. Carter continued. "But there's a problem. We need someone who can not only lead the technology side of this mission, but also manage the logistics, the politics, and the human factors. We believe you have the unique skill set to make it happen." Elon's pulse quickened. He had always dreamed of space colonization. SpaceX's vision was always about making humanity a multiplanetary species, but this was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. A mission to establish a permanent colony on Mars wasn't just a possibility, it was a reality. And it was happening now. "Let me get this straight," Elon said, leaning forward in his chair. "You're asking me to lead this mission? Why me?" "We believe your track record speaks for itself," Dr. Carter answered. "Your work with SpaceX, Tesla, and your vision for the future of humanity is unparalleled. But beyond that, we've seen your resilience in the face of adversity. You're the only one who can bring this mission to fruition." Elon was silent for a moment, the weight of the offer settling over him. He had always known that his vision for the future extended beyond Earth's atmosphere, but this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for, the chance to take humanity to Mars. But even as the excitement began to grow, a small voice in the back of his mind raised concerns. Could he really handle this? Could he balance this monumental task with the demands of Tesla, SpaceX, and everything else in his life? The pressure was already overwhelming. Could he stretch himself even further? And if he accepted, how would it affect his personal life, his relationships with his family, friends, and colleagues? I need some time to think about it, Elon said, his voice steady but thoughtful. I'll need to consider the implications of this. Dr. Carter paused for a moment. Of course, Elon. Take all the time you need. But remember, the window for this mission is closing fast. The decision must be made soon. With that, the call ended, and Elon sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the sprawling Silicon Valley skyline. The moment had arrived, the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was within his reach, but it came with a price that would require him to push harder, work longer, and sacrifice more than he ever had before. But for the first time in a long while, Elon felt a spark of excitement ignite within him. This wasn't just another challenge. This was the challenge that would define the rest of his life. The chance to do something so monumental that it would change the course of history. He took a deep breath. This was the turning point he had been waiting for. The next morning, Elon gathered his team at SpaceX. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with uncertainty. The failure of the previous rocket launch still loomed over them, and the road ahead was clouded with doubt. But when Elon walked into the room, he exuded a new energy. His face was focused, his eyes burning with purpose. "We've been through a lot lately," he began, his voice commanding attention. "But we can't afford to dwell on what's behind us. We've got a chance to change everything. We've been approached by the Global Space Agency, and they want us to lead a mission to establish a permanent human colony on Mars." The room fell silent. The audacity of the mission was almost too much to fathom. But Elon's eyes were filled with a fierce resolve that was unmistakable. This was it. This was the chance to fulfill the vision he had been chasing for so long. "We've got a lot of work to do," Elon continued. "But I believe in this team. I believe in what we can accomplish together. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is." His words resonated with the team. They had followed him through thick and thin, and now they were being asked to do the impossible. But with Elon leading them, they felt an overwhelming sense of belief. This was more than just a company. This was a movement. Over the next few days, Elon worked tirelessly with his team at SpaceX, Tesla, and other partners to begin planning the logistics of the Mars mission. Every detail had to be accounted for. The technology, the transportation, the sustainable habitats, the life support systems. It was a monumental task, one that would take years to complete. But for the first time in a long while, Elon felt a sense of clarity. He had a purpose again, and as the days went by, the weight of his doubts began to lift. The future was unfolding before him, and he wasn't going to let anything stand in his way. This was his moment to make a lasting impact, to do something that would define his legacy. Elon had asked himself this question countless times over the past few weeks. But now, as he looked out over the team, as he watched them come together to work on something so groundbreaking, he knew the answer. It wasn't just about technology. It wasn't just about business. It was about the future of humanity. It was about taking that first step towards the stars. And Elon Musk was ready to take it. The early months of planning the Mars mission were a blur for Elon. Every day was filled with meetings, calculations, and brainstorming sessions, all aimed at one singular goal: the survival and success of humanity's first permanent settlement on Mars. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, and with each passing day, the weight of the responsibility became heavier. But there was something else driving him, an overwhelming sense of purpose that kept him pushing forward, even when everything seemed impossible. But as the months wore on, cracks began to show. The pressure that Elon had been under for years, compounded by the burden of leading this audacious mission, began to take a toll. His team at SpaceX, while brilliant and dedicated, was growing weary. The setbacks, the long hours, and the countless challenges were starting to wear them down. Even the most optimistic among them were beginning to question whether they could really achieve what they had set out to do. Elon himself wasn't immune to the weight of it all. The endless meetings, the constant demands, and the nagging doubts that crept into his mind when he was alone in his office at night. They were all starting to take a toll on him. His health was deteriorating. He was barely sleeping, subsisting on caffeine and the adrenaline of the mission. But in the midst of it all, he couldn't afford to stop. He couldn't afford to let his team see the cracks forming. Not now, not when everything was so close to falling apart. Then, one evening, as Elon was reviewing the latest designs for the Mars habitat, he received a call that would send shockwaves through his entire life. It was from his brother, Kimball. "Elon," Kimball's voice crackled through the phone, urgency in every syllable. "You need to slow down. You're burning yourself out. You're not just putting your health at risk, you're putting everything at risk. Tesla is in trouble, and SpaceX is facing huge setbacks. People are starting to talk, and not in a good way." Elon could feel his heart sink as his brother's words hit him like a brick. He had been so consumed by the Mars mission, so fixated on the bigger picture, that he had neglected the foundations of everything he had built, the companies, the people who depended on him, and, most importantly, his own well-being. "I'm fine," Elon lied, though even he could hear the strain in his voice. "I just need to focus. We're close, Kimball. We're on the edge of something huge. You wouldn't understand. This is our chance to change everything." "I do understand, Elon," Kimball replied, his tone softening, "but not at the expense of everything else. You've built something incredible, but you can't ignore the people who are counting on you. You can't keep running at this pace. You've got to take care of yourself, or all of this will crumble." Elon sat in silence, the weight of his brother's words sinking in. Kimball was right. He had been so consumed by the mission, by the dream of reaching Mars, that he had forgotten the very thing that had propelled him forward in the first place, his purpose. He wasn't just trying to build a future in space. He was trying to build a future for people, for his family, his employees, and even for himself. But that future couldn't be built if he burned out in the process. As the days wore on, Elon found himself at a crossroads. The mission to Mars was still on track, but the cost had become undeniable. He was stretched too thin, and the cracks were starting to show. He needed to reassess his priorities, to find a way to balance the grand vision with the reality of the present. One night, after a long day of meetings and planning, Elon took a walk alone through the SpaceX campus. The moon hung low in the sky, a reminder of the distant world he was trying to reach. As he walked, his thoughts swirled. He thought about the early days of SpaceX, when everything had seemed impossible, but they had persevered. He thought about the people who had believed in him, people who were still working tirelessly to make his dream a reality. And he thought about the cost. The sacrifices made, the relationships strained, and the toll on his own health. In that moment, it all came into focus. He realized that he had been so focused on the end goal, Mars, that he had lost sight of the journey. He had been so consumed by the need to succeed, to prove that he was right, that he had forgotten the importance of balance. The future of humanity didn't just rest on his shoulders. It rested on the shoulders of the people around him, his team, his family, his world. For the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself to feel the weight of his emotions. The stress, the uncertainty, and the fear that had been gnawing at him all these months came flooding to the surface. He had sacrificed so much: his health, his relationships, and his peace of mind, in the pursuit of something greater. But was it worth it? As he stood in the quiet of the night, looking up at the stars, Elon realized that the answer wasn't just about the mission. It was about the people he was doing it for. It was about the ones who believed in him, who had stood by him through thick and thin. It was about finding a way to move forward without losing sight of the things that truly mattered. The next day, Elon called a meeting with his leadership team at SpaceX. He had been running on adrenaline for so long that he had forgotten the importance of transparency and collaboration. He needed to lean on them, to admit that he couldn't do it all alone. "Listen," Elon began, standing in front of the team, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I've been pushing this mission so hard that I've lost sight of everything else. I've pushed you all, and I've pushed myself beyond our limits. I've made mistakes, and I'm sorry for that." There was a moment of silence as his team exchanged looks. But instead of judgment, there was understanding. They knew what he had been through. They knew how hard he had worked, how much of himself he had poured into this vision. "We're in this together," Elon continued, "and I need your help. I need to trust that we can take this mission forward without sacrificing everything we've built. Let's focus on the big picture, but let's also take care of ourselves and each other." The room was filled with a new sense of energy, a sense of shared purpose. For the first time in months, Elon felt like he wasn't carrying the weight alone. He wasn't just the leader of a company or the visionary of a mission. He was a part of something much bigger, a team, a family, a movement. Elon had asked himself this question time and time again. But now, he understood the answer. It wasn't just about the destination. It was about the journey and the people who walked with him along the way. With them by his side, he knew there was nothing they couldn't achieve. And as he looked ahead, the stars no longer seemed so distant. They were within reach. Together, they would get there. The decision had been made. Elon Musk knew the road ahead would still be riddled with challenges, but after weeks of reflection and collaboration with his team, a sense of clarity had emerged. The mission to Mars was not just about technological innovation or financial success. It was about legacy. It was about humanity's future, the kind of world he wanted to leave behind, and how he could make the seemingly impossible possible. The weight of the previous months, full of struggles, doubts, and setbacks, had been immense, but as Elon stood before his team at SpaceX, something had shifted. There was an energy in the room that hadn't been there before. People were no longer just reacting to the pressure. They were pushing forward with renewed focus, driven by a shared vision. Elon had opened up to them, admitted his vulnerabilities, and had asked for their help, not just as employees, but as partners in the journey to make history. "It's time for the final push," Elon said, his voice steady but full of conviction. "We've got the chance to do something no one thought possible. We're going to take humanity to Mars." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. But as he looked around, Elon could feel the shift in the air. The team was with him, more united than ever. Each person in the room had their own reasons for being there, but now they shared one mission: to make the impossible happen. As the weeks turned into months, the Mars mission began to take shape. Every component of the spacecraft, every plan for habitat construction, every protocol for survival, it all began to fall into place. There were still setbacks along the way, unexpected delays, and moments of doubt, but something fundamental had changed within Elon and his team. They had learned to embrace the challenges, to see them not as roadblocks but as opportunities to grow. Elon found a new sense of balance in his life. He had learned to delegate, to trust the team around him, and, most importantly, he had learned to take care of himself. He still worked tirelessly, still put in long hours, but he had learned to step back when needed, to spend time with his family, and to give himself the space to recharge. During this period of growth, Elon also found himself reconnecting with his family. He hadn't realized how much time he had lost with them in his pursuit of the mission. He had always thought that pushing forward relentlessly was the only way to achieve his goals. But now, he saw that the connections with his loved ones were not a distraction from his work. They were an essential part of it. One evening, Elon sat with his mother, May Musk, and his brother, Kimball, in a quiet family gathering. The conversation was light, but underneath it, a deep sense of gratitude ran through him. His mother, who had always been an unwavering support, looked at him with a mix of pride and concern. "You've come a long way, Elon," May said softly, "but I think you're finally starting to understand the most important lesson, that the people who love you and believe in you are just as important as the big dreams you're chasing." Elon nodded, his eyes reflecting the weight of the journey. "I've been so focused on the destination that I've forgotten to appreciate the people who've been with me all along. I used to think the mission was everything, but now, I know it's about the legacy we leave behind. Not just the technology, but the connections we create along the way." Kimball smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "It's about balance. You've always been a visionary, Elon, but you've also got to make sure you're there for the people who matter most." And for the first time in years, Elon felt a deep sense of peace. The pressure had not dissipated entirely, but he had found a new perspective. The mission to Mars was still his driving force, but it no longer defined him entirely. It was a part of him, but it was not the only part. As the mission reached its final stages, the world watched in awe. SpaceX's Mars mission was no longer just a distant dream. It was a reality that was within arm's reach. The spacecraft was ready. The colonists had been selected. The infrastructure for the first permanent human settlement on Mars was being constructed. The countdown had begun. In the final weeks leading up to the launch, Elon found himself reflecting on everything that had led him to this moment. The road had been long, filled with challenges and setbacks, but every failure had ultimately brought him closer to this point. He had lost friends, strained relationships, and faced constant criticism, but he had kept going, fueled by a vision that refused to die. On the day of the launch, the world was holding its breath. The countdown was nearly complete, and everything was in place for history to be made. Elon stood in the control room, his gaze fixed on the screen in front of him. The engineers and mission specialists were all around him, their faces a mix of anxiety and excitement. The moment finally arrived. With a thunderous roar, the spacecraft lifted off from Earth, soaring into the sky. The crowd in the control room erupted into cheers, but Elon remained still, his heart racing. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. For years, he had fought to prove that this dream was possible. Now, as the spacecraft traveled toward Mars, he knew that humanity's future had just changed forever. They had reached the stars, not just as a scientific endeavor, but as a collective effort to ensure the survival and progress of the human race. Elon watched the first footage of the Mars landing, seeing the first steps taken on the red planet. The images were surreal, something he had only imagined as a young man dreaming of space travel. Now, they were real. This wasn't just his accomplishment. This was the work of an entire team, of thousands of people who had believed in the mission and worked tirelessly to make it happen. The legacy Elon Musk had set out to create was no longer a distant dream. It was a new reality. And as he watched the first human footsteps imprint on the Martian soil, a wave of emotion washed over him. He had done it, and so had all those who had helped him along the way. It had been a few months since the successful Mars landing, and the world was still reeling from the incredible achievement. Headlines everywhere heralded the event as one of humanity's greatest milestones, and the images of humans walking on Mars were plastered across every screen. But for Elon, the journey wasn't about basking in the glory of the moment. It was about what came next. The Mars settlement was beginning to take root, with initial steps toward establishing a sustainable presence on the red planet. The habitat modules were operational, and the first crops had been planted under the controlled environments of the greenhouse domes. The dream he had been chasing for decades was no longer just an idea or a set of plans. It was real. But with this reality came a new set of challenges. As SpaceX worked to ensure the sustainability of the Martian colony, there was an increasing pressure to solve Earth's problems too. Climate change, energy crises, and social unrest were growing issues that demanded attention. Elon realized that the mission to Mars, as important as it was, would be part of a broader vision. A vision where the knowledge gained from space exploration could be applied to help solve humanity's most pressing issues on Earth. In the wake of the Mars landing, Elon had been more reflective than usual. He'd spoken to the media, given numerous interviews, and addressed global leaders. But as the euphoria began to fade, the true weight of his legacy was settling in. The pressure was mounting, not just to succeed in space, but to make a meaningful difference on Earth. One evening, as Elon sat alone in his office at SpaceX, staring out at the distant lights of the city, he thought about his family and the people who had supported him over the years. He thought about how much he had sacrificed for this singular goal. His relationship with his children had been strained at times. His marriage, once full of promise, had faltered under the strain of his obsession with the mission. He had long ago pushed away the idea of balance, believing that personal sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. But now, sitting quietly with the enormity of his success, he began to wonder if the sacrifices had been worth it. The thought lingered as he turned his attention back to the mission reports on his desk. The Mars colony was thriving in its early stages, but the road ahead was long. There would be unforeseen challenges, technical, human, and environmental, that would require all of SpaceX's ingenuity and perseverance. As he looked at the reports, his phone buzzed with a message from his mother, May Musk. She had always been a grounding force in his life, even when he was pushing toward the seemingly impossible. Elon, I've been thinking a lot about the mission and everything you've accomplished. But I also think it's time to start thinking about the legacy you're building for your children. They need you now more than ever. You've changed the world, but don't forget to be present for the ones you love. The message was simple, but it cut through the noise. It was a reminder that, for all of his achievements, there were still people who needed him in ways that Mars never could. It wasn't just about building rockets or landing on distant planets. It was about the people he cared about most and how they would remember him. Elon took a deep breath. He wasn't sure how to balance it all, but the message had struck a chord. Maybe it was time for a shift, a new chapter. The mission to Mars was only the beginning of something much bigger. There were still problems to solve on Earth, and he knew that the key to overcoming them would lie in the innovation, creativity, and determination he had honed throughout his career. But this time, he would approach it with a new sense of balance. A few days later, Elon found himself at a family gathering, something he hadn't done in a while. The room was filled with laughter, warmth, and the chaotic energy that came with having a large, close-knit family. His children were running around, and for a moment, he just stood there, watching them with a sense of pride. Despite everything he had built, these moments with his family, was what truly mattered. "You've been quiet," Kimball said, walking over to Elon with a knowing look. "You've changed, Elon. There's a sense of peace about you. What's going on?" Elon looked at his brother, feeling a rare sense of vulnerability. "I think I've been chasing something so hard, Kimball, that I lost sight of what's right in front of me. The mission to Mars, it was everything. But now, I realize that I have to find balance. I can't keep giving up my personal life for this dream. There's a bigger picture, and it involves the people I love." Kimball nodded, a smile of understanding forming on his face. "I'm proud of you, Elon. We all are. And I know it's hard, but you're getting there." Later that evening, Elon sat with his children, the ones who had been there through his highs and lows, the ones who had seen him at his best and worst. He realized that while the work he had done on Mars was extraordinary, the work that remained to be done on Earth, at home, in his relationships, and in his own soul, was just as important. He had reached the stars, but now, it was time to focus on the Earth beneath his feet. He didn't need to choose one over the other. The vision he had created for humanity was never just about reaching Mars. It was about creating a sustainable future for the entire human race, on Earth and beyond. As Elon watched his children play in the yard, he allowed himself a moment of peace. He had built the foundation for a new era of space exploration, but now, it was time to build something just as important, an era of connection, love, and purpose on Earth. His legacy wouldn't be defined by the stars he reached, but by the lives he touched, the people he inspired, and the changes he made on this planet. The journey ahead was still long, but he no longer felt alone on the path. This time, he wasn't just chasing a vision of the future. He was embracing the present, savoring the connections that truly mattered. For Elon Musk, the answer had evolved over the years. It was no longer just about the triumph of human achievement in space. It was about the relationships that shaped him, the love that grounded him, and the responsibility he had not only to the future of humanity but to those closest to him. It was a balance between ambition and the quieter, yet deeper, aspects of life. As he watched his children, his family, and his team continue to build a future together, he realized that his legacy would be defined not by the rockets he launched or the planets he reached, but by the hearts he touched and the lives he helped transform. And with that, Elon Musk felt ready for the next phase of his journey, one that would not only take humanity to Mars, but elevate the very spirit of humanity itself. Months had passed since the first successful landing on Mars, and while the excitement of the mission had settled into the fabric of human history, the work was far from over. Elon Musk's gaze was always forward. The media could capture the headlines, but Elon wasn't in it for the applause or the recognition. He had never been. The Mars colony was still in its early stages, with infrastructure being built, but the pressure to keep advancing, to solve problems that no one had ever considered, was relentless. But there was something different this time. Elon had found an equilibrium he hadn't known he needed. It wasn't about sacrificing everything for the sake of progress. It was about harmonizing ambition with compassion. And, most importantly, it was about giving people hope in a way he hadn't before. SpaceX's Mars colony was thriving, but it wasn't just the technological advancements that thrilled Elon anymore. What he saw when he looked at the footage from Mars, colonists planting seeds in the Martian soil, building homes, living in domes, they weren't just surviving. They were creating a life. And that life was a symbol of humanity's resilience, its desire to reach beyond what was thought to be impossible. However, the next big challenge loomed ahead. Sustaining humanity on Mars was only one part of the vision. How could these new colonies be self-sustaining, environmentally friendly, and capable of long-term growth? And more importantly, what would Earth learn from all this? Elon knew that the answers to these questions were not just found in space. They were rooted in what people did right here on Earth. Space exploration wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about innovating in a way that would ultimately help solve Earth's most pressing challenges. This vision had been with him all along, but now, the urgency was clearer than ever. One late night, as Elon sat at his desk going over research from both Earth and Mars, his thoughts drifted to Earth's environmental crises. The effects of climate change were undeniable, and the problems were growing. His focus had always been on technological advancement, but the potential of these advancements wasn't just about space. They had a tangible role to play on Earth, too. His companies, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, had all been designed with the same guiding principle: to accelerate the transition to a sustainable future. Tesla was pushing the limits of electric vehicles and renewable energy. SpaceX had advanced rocket technology to make space travel more accessible, and now it was leading the charge to Mars. Neuralink was pushing the boundaries of neuroscience and artificial intelligence, offering the potential to augment human intelligence and tackle diseases like Alzheimer's. But now, Elon understood the deeper purpose of all these ventures. They weren't just about profit or competition. They were about solving the Earth's biggest problems, from energy sustainability to climate change, to improving the quality of life for people around the globe. The innovation he had once considered to be solely for space exploration was now about addressing issues that hit closer to home. The journey to Mars would not only serve humanity in its quest for the stars, but it would also offer critical insights into how to build a more sustainable future on Earth. Elon believed that these two worlds, Mars and Earth, were intimately connected. One was the testing ground for the future of humanity, and the other was the starting point from which everything grew. As SpaceX continued to expand its footprint on Mars, Elon gathered a team of scientists and engineers to work on solving the environmental issues that had been identified during the Mars missions. They were studying the planet's atmosphere, its resources, and its ecosystem, learning how to adapt life on Mars to the needs of humanity. They weren't just building a colony. They were learning how to thrive in an alien environment, how to recycle water, produce food in extreme conditions, and harness renewable energy from the sun. Every challenge they faced became an opportunity to test solutions that could eventually help Earth. Meanwhile, on Earth, Tesla's innovations were reaching new heights. The gigafactories were expanding at an unprecedented rate, and the electric vehicles were becoming more accessible, with a focus on energy efficiency. Solar energy was becoming the primary source of power for thousands of homes, and electric planes were no longer a distant dream. There was a tangible shift happening, a quiet revolution in the way people lived, worked, and interacted with the environment. Elon had always believed that technological innovation could solve humanity's biggest problems, but now he was seeing it unfold before him. Earth wasn't just a planet to be preserved for future generations. It was a place where innovation could spark a new kind of renaissance, one rooted in sustainability, compassion, and progress. One afternoon, Elon found himself in a conversation with his children. He had come a long way from the man who had once been consumed by ambition to the visionary who saw the need for balance in life. He had learned to nurture not just his vision, but the people he loved. "Do you think we'll live on Mars someday?" one of his children asked, their eyes wide with curiosity. Elon smiled, a warmth filling his chest. "You might. I believe humanity will eventually make Mars a second home. But that's not the only thing we should think about. It's not just about getting there. It's about what we do once we get there. The same goes for Earth. It's our home, and we have to make sure we take care of it too." His children looked at him thoughtfully, their innocence and wonder grounding him in that moment. They were his legacy, his reminder that no matter how far humanity reached, It would always be the bonds between people that mattered most. Back at SpaceX headquarters, Elon was reviewing the latest updates on Mars colonization when a video popped up on his screen. It was a message from the astronauts currently living on Mars. "Hello, Earth," the lead astronaut said. "We are excited to report that the first crops have been harvested successfully and the habitat modules are operating as expected. The colony is growing, and we are beginning to build something truly remarkable here." The video played on, showing footage of the crew working together, planting seeds in the Martian soil, and assembling the structures for their new homes. Elon watched it quietly, feeling a mix of pride and disbelief. It was one thing to dream about this day, and another entirely to see it unfold in real time. For all the challenges, for all the doubts that had followed him throughout his journey, this was the moment when everything came together. They weren't just on the cusp of human history, they were making it. As the video concluded, Elon felt a surge of hope. The road ahead was still long, and the challenges would continue. But humanity had done the impossible, and in doing so, it had sparked a wave of change that would ripple across the planet. Elon Musk had answered this question many times in his life, but now, in the quiet moments of reflection, he understood it in a deeper sense. It wasn't about pushing forward for the sake of ambition or glory. It was about building a future where humanity could thrive, where Earth and Mars weren't separate goals but part of the same journey. It was about finding hope in progress, creating solutions that would benefit generations to come, and never losing sight of the most important truth of all. It was not the distance between Earth and Mars that mattered. It was the distance between people, and the ability to bring them closer, to make the impossible a reality, and to share a future filled with hope. The journey would continue, but now, it was no longer about simply reaching for the stars. It was about the legacy left behind, one small step at a time. Elon Musk had always been a man driven by an unrelenting sense of urgency. Whether it was his work at SpaceX, Tesla, or Neuralink, he had always been determined to tackle the biggest problems head-on. But as he found himself at the pinnacle of his achievements, watching humanity's first steps on Mars and seeing the ripple effect of his efforts on Earth, something shifted inside him. It wasn't just about making history anymore. It was about transforming the way the world viewed progress, and the way people viewed themselves in relation to the world. For years, Elon had been seen as the visionary who took on the impossible. His name was synonymous with space exploration, electric vehicles, and cutting-edge technology. But now, he realized that his true impact could be far greater than any single achievement. He had the power not just to change industries, but to reshape the way people thought about their place in the universe, the future of humanity, and the kind of legacy they wanted to leave behind. One crisp morning, as Elon walked through the corridors of SpaceX's headquarters, he was greeted by the usual buzz of activity. Engineers were hunched over computers, reviewing calculations for the next Mars launch. Teams were collaborating on the new Tesla battery technologies, working tirelessly to make electric vehicles the standard. Despite the hum of productivity around him, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to do, more he needed to understand, and more he needed to give. He paused by the window that overlooked the sprawling campus, gazing out at the work in progress. He could see the rocket hangars where SpaceX's latest starships were being assembled, the solar panels gleaming on the roofs of the factories, and the constant flow of people moving toward their respective tasks. He had built an empire of innovation, but now he wondered if there was a way to further ignite the spark of change, not just through technology, but through the way people thought about progress. What would it take to shift the world's mindset about the future? The answer, he realized, lay in changing how people viewed challenges. People didn't always see the obstacles in their lives as opportunities for growth. They saw them as barriers to success. But the reality was that every challenge, whether on Earth or Mars, was an opportunity to innovate, to learn, and to evolve. At a roundtable discussion later that week, Elon posed a question to his team. What if we stopped thinking about our problems as roadblocks? What if we began to see them as stepping stones, as the keys to unlocking a future we can't even yet imagine? His team listened intently, knowing that when Elon spoke, it wasn't just a challenge. It was an invitation to think bigger, to stretch their imaginations, and to look beyond the immediate obstacles. He wasn't just asking them to solve problems. He was asking them to shift the entire perspective on what those problems meant. This isn't just about getting to Mars, he continued. This is about teaching the world that progress is an ongoing process. And in that process, failure isn't the end. It's the beginning of something even better. If we can teach people to embrace failure, to see it as a chance to improve, then we're not just innovating in technology, we're innovating in mindset. The team nodded, their minds racing with new possibilities. It was true. Most people, especially in the world of business and innovation, viewed setbacks as a sign to retreat, to reevaluate, or even to give up. But Elon had built his entire career on learning from failure. SpaceX's early rocket launches had failed spectacularly, but those failures had led to the ultimate success. Tesla's early struggles had been monumental, but now, the company was the leader in electric vehicles. It was this mentality, the mindset that failure was simply the next step toward success, that Elon wanted to instill in the world. And Mars, for all its technical and environmental challenges, was the perfect place to prove this. That afternoon, Elon sat down with the leadership team at Tesla to discuss the next big step for the company, the development of a fully sustainable city powered entirely by renewable energy. They had already begun to transition communities to solar energy, and their electric vehicles had been gaining traction across the globe. But what if they could go even further? What if, instead of just making products that reduced humanity's environmental footprint, they could create entire cities that were self-sustaining, living, breathing models of how the world could be in the future? Elon's vision was grand. He wanted to create a city that would not only be environmentally sustainable, but also serve as a testing ground for the technologies of tomorrow: zero-emission transportation, renewable energy solutions, advanced water recycling, and more. It would be a model for the world, an embodiment of the belief that humanity could not just survive on Earth, but thrive in harmony with the planet. He believed that by creating a living example, they could catalyze the transformation the world needed. The city would prove that sustainable living was not only possible but preferable, and that the future was one in which humanity's growth was inextricably linked to the health of the planet. As the discussions about the sustainable city unfolded, Elon found himself reflecting once again on the bigger picture. The Mars mission, the development of renewable energy, the electric vehicles, they were all part of a single, larger goal. He realized that the key to true progress wasn't just about developing the right technologies. It was about empowering people to believe in a better future, to feel like they could be active participants in that future, and to recognize their power to drive change. For years, Elon had been a lone voice pushing for the impossible. But now, he was starting to see something shift. More and more people were beginning to believe that the future didn't have to be a dystopian nightmare. It could be one of incredible possibility, innovation, and unity. His vision for Mars wasn't just about colonizing another planet. It was about showing humanity what was possible when people worked together toward a common goal. It was about leading by example, pushing the boundaries of what people thought was possible, and inspiring others to join in the effort. One evening, Elon stood in front of a group of global leaders, business executives, and thought leaders at a sustainability summit. The world was watching, and this moment felt different than any speech he had ever given before. His usual rhetoric about Mars, rockets, and electric cars had been replaced with something more urgent, more personal. "I stand before you today," Elon began, "not just as the CEO of a few companies, but as a father, a member of the human race, and someone who believes deeply in the power of innovation to change the world. We are at a turning point in history. The challenges we face today, climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, are not insurmountable, but they will require all of us, all of humanity, to shift our thinking and to work together, not just for survival, but for the kind of future we want to leave for the next generations." He paused, looking around at the faces in the crowd. There was a palpable sense of urgency in the room. Elon had spoken about the future for years, but today, it wasn't just his vision that was in the air. It was a collective vision, one shared by those who had once seen him as a dreamer, but now saw him as a catalyst for change. Let's embrace failure, let's embrace challenges, and let's see them not as obstacles but as opportunities. Because the future we build is not just about the technology we create. It's about the world we create together. Elon Musk knew the answer now. It wasn't just about rockets or electric vehicles Mars, or Earth. It was about shifting the way humanity viewed its future. It was about inspiring hope and creating solutions that empowered people, businesses, and governments to rise above the problems that seemed impossible to solve. It was about transforming fear into possibility, and in doing so, pushing humanity forward not just technologically, but as a united, visionary species capable of shaping its destiny. And as he stood there, looking out over the summit, Elon felt a quiet confidence. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was filled with potential. It was a road he couldn't walk alone, but one he would walk with the world, one step at a time. The weeks following Elon's speech at the Sustainability Summit marked a turning point not just for his companies, but for the entire world. His words resonated deeply, stirring a collective consciousness that had long been dormant. The world had heard his vision before: space exploration, electric vehicles, and colonization of Mars. But this time, his message was different. It was more than just about technological advancements or futuristic ambitions. It was about a collective awakening, a shift in the way humanity viewed its future. The ripple effect of his speech was swift and undeniable. Environmental activists, scientists, political leaders, and entrepreneurs from all corners of the globe began to see the urgency in what Elon had said. They understood that the path forward wasn't just about technological breakthroughs. It was about fundamentally changing how humanity interacted with the Earth, with each other, and with the future. Elon's influence spread, but it was no longer just through the success of his companies or the headlines he made. It was in the hearts and minds of people everywhere. He had sparked something, an awakening that was larger than any single person, bigger than any single project. This was a global movement, one that transcended borders and industries, uniting people from all walks of life in a shared mission to ensure a sustainable, prosperous future for generations to come. Back in the halls of SpaceX, Elon watched as engineers and scientists continued to work tirelessly on the Mars projects. But now, there was an added sense of purpose in their work. The vision had expanded beyond the technical aspects of space travel. It was now about ensuring that humanity's expansion into the stars could be done in a way that honored Earth, its resources, and its future. While the Mars missions progressed, Elon knew that the most critical work was happening on Earth. The need for collaboration, for partnerships, and for collective action had never been clearer. And yet, there was still a part of him that felt the weight of the challenges ahead. How could humanity overcome the obstacles of climate change, resource depletion, and inequality? Was it even possible to shift entire industries and cultures at such a rapid pace? The questions weighed heavily on him, but he knew that progress wasn't about having all the answers. It was about starting the conversation and inviting others to join in the effort. And that's exactly what was happening. One evening, as Elon sat at his desk, reviewing proposals for Tesla's next big initiative, a global push to bring solar energy to every home on Earth, he received a call from a prominent environmental activist, Leah Wilson. Leah had been one of the most vocal advocates for sustainability and had been following Elon's work for years, often calling out his companies for not doing enough. But her tone today was different. "Elon," she began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the summit, and I have to admit, you've shifted my perspective. Maybe we're looking at the future all wrong. Maybe we've been too focused on the problems and not enough on the solutions that are right in front of us." Elon smiled, recognizing the sincerity in her voice. "I'm glad to hear that. I think the solutions are there, but they require all of us to come together, to make the hard choices, and to accept that it won't be easy. But it's possible." Leah paused for a moment before responding. "I want to talk to you about something. I think we need to create a global coalition, business leaders, governments, NGOs, people who can come together and make real, impactful changes. We need to combine the power of innovation with the authority of governance to create lasting, systemic change. And I believe you're the one who can make it happen." Elon's heart raced. This was the kind of collaboration he had envisioned, the kind that bridged the gap between technological innovation and the systemic changes needed to address the world's crises. It wasn't just about building rockets or cars. It was about creating the frameworks that would allow those innovations to thrive. "I'm in," Elon said without hesitation. "Let's make it happen." The following months were filled with meetings, negotiations, and the formation of what would come to be known as the Global Sustainability Coalition, GSC. It was a coalition of leaders from every sector: business, government, technology, agriculture, and environmentalism, who came together with a single goal: to create a sustainable, equitable future for all. The GSC would focus on three main pillars: accelerating the transition to renewable energy, investing in sustainable infrastructure, and ensuring that the benefits of innovation were distributed equitably to all people. It wasn't just about the wealthy nations or the powerful corporations. It was about ensuring that the global transition to sustainability benefited every human being, regardless of where they lived or their socioeconomic status. Elon was at the helm of this effort, working tirelessly to unite diverse groups of people around a shared vision. His name, once synonymous with the ambitious goal of getting to Mars, was now becoming synonymous with the global effort to save Earth. One day, as Elon stood in front of a large audience at the United Nations, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders. This was no longer just about one man's vision. This was about the future of humanity. The world was watching. The future we want to build isn't one that happens by accident, Elon began, his voice steady. It happens because people like you, leaders, innovators, thinkers, and dreamers, decide to take action. We've been given the tools, the technology, and the knowledge to create a sustainable future for ourselves and for our children. But the question is, will we rise to the occasion? There was a pause in the room as the words hung in the air. Elon knew that the task ahead was monumental. But for the first time, he saw the beginnings of something larger than just a technological revolution. He saw a movement, a collective will to create a better future. We can't afford to wait any longer, Elon continued. The challenges we face, climate change, resource scarcity, inequality, are not problems that can be solved by any one country, corporation, or individual. They require collaboration. They require us to think beyond borders, beyond industries, and beyond our own limited understanding of what's possible. The time for action is now. Back at SpaceX, the Mars mission was progressing as planned, but Elon knew that the real work, what would define this era, was taking place here on Earth. The GSC was already seeing the impact of its efforts. New policies were being enacted to reduce carbon emissions, the transition to electric vehicles was accelerating, and communities around the world were beginning to embrace sustainable living. Tesla's solar panels were being installed in homes across the globe, and new renewable energy solutions were being tested in regions that had long been dependent on fossil fuels. It was a slow, steady shift, but Elon could feel it happening. The vision that had once seemed too ambitious, too far-fetched, was now unfolding in real time. And the ripple effect was undeniable. For Elon, the answer had always been clear. The belief that innovation, when guided by a higher purpose, could change the world. But now, that purpose wasn't just about creating technology. It was about creating a movement, a global coalition that would transform humanity's relationship with the planet, with each other, and with the future. And as he looked at the progress that had already been made, he knew this was only the beginning. The challenges were still immense, but the world was waking up. And together, humanity could face the impossible and turn it into the possible. The road ahead was long, but the journey had already begun. And it was a journey that would define the course of human history. The momentum that Elon had begun to build with the Global Sustainability Coalition, GSC, was becoming undeniable. What had started as a single speech at a summit had now evolved into a global movement. From grassroots environmental activists to corporate giants, the message was resonating far and wide. Humanity had the power to change its trajectory, but only through collective action. In the months after the formation of the GSC, significant strides were made. Governments around the world started to align their policies with the goals of sustainability, committing to net zero emissions by 2050. Major corporations, once resistant to change, now found themselves reevaluating their business models in light of the new global consensus. The private sector was beginning to see that sustainability was not just a moral obligation but a business opportunity. Tesla, under Elon's guidance, had seen its market share skyrocket, with more and more cities adopting electric vehicle infrastructure. Meanwhile, SpaceX's Mars mission was no longer viewed as a distant fantasy. The world now saw the journey to the Red Planet as part of a larger mission to ensure the survival and thriving of humanity. SpaceX wasn't just building rockets. It was building the foundation for a future in which humans could not only live on Earth but also expand beyond it. Yet, as the global shift began to take shape, Elon found himself facing a new set of challenges. The rise of the GSC had exposed underlying tensions, old divisions between countries, industries, and ideologies that had to be addressed before progress could be fully realized. The world had to come together, but not all were ready to let go of their entrenched interests. At a critical meeting with the leaders of several nations, Elon sat at the table with figures whose names carried immense weight. The room buzzed with discussion, and the stakes were high. It wasn't just about technological progress anymore. It was about defining the future of global cooperation. "Gentlemen, we're at a crossroads," Elon began, his voice steady but commanding. "The decisions we make today will set the course for the next century. We're not just talking about a sustainable future for our children. We're talking about a future where humanity can flourish in harmony with the planet. But to do that, we need to put aside differences and work together." There was a moment of silence. The leaders in the room, representing different political ideologies and economic priorities, exchanged uneasy glances. Elon could sense their hesitation. Sustainability was not a simple issue. It was inherently tied to power, resources, and control. The path to a greener future meant reallocating those resources in ways that many of them weren't ready to accept. One of the leaders, a well-known climate change skeptic, leaned forward. "What you're asking us to do is not just shift our policies. It's to completely upend the global order. Economies are built on fossil fuels, and those industries provide jobs for millions. What's going to happen to them? What's the plan for the workers whose livelihoods depend on oil, coal, and gas?" Elon knew this would be the toughest argument. Transitioning to a sustainable future was not just about technology. It was about people, and that included the millions who depended on industries that were part of the problem, not the solution. "We can't afford to leave anyone behind," Elon responded. "The future we're building isn't just about energy. It's about jobs, communities, and economies that are built to last. We need to invest in retraining workers for new industries, create renewable energy jobs, and ensure that the benefits of this transition are felt by everyone. We're talking about a global economy that works for all of humanity, not just the privileged few." There was a pause in the room as the leaders considered Elon's words. Some looked skeptical, others contemplative. But in that moment, something had shifted. The debate was no longer about whether sustainability could happen. It was about how to make it happen in a way that benefited everyone. And that, Elon knew, was the key to unlocking the global consensus. While these high-level negotiations took place, the work on the ground was just as critical. The GSC's initiatives were expanding rapidly. Tesla's solar roof initiative had begun transforming communities, providing affordable solar energy to millions of homes. New industries dedicated to sustainable practices were emerging, and billions of dollars were being funneled into research and development of green technologies. But the most significant change was the growing awareness that every individual had a role to play in the future of the planet. Elon often received messages from people around the world, ordinary citizens who were taking matters into their own hands. A group of students in Paris had organized a citywide initiative to plant trees in urban spaces. A family in California had converted their home to be completely off the grid, using solar panels, rainwater collection systems, and electric vehicles. An entrepreneur in Nigeria had started a company that developed affordable solar solutions for remote villages. The global movement was taking shape in the most beautiful, organic ways. People were no longer waiting for the world's leaders to act. They were taking the future into their own hands. But there were still those who resisted change, those who saw the push for sustainability as a threat to their power and influence. Some of the largest oil companies, for example, had quietly started to lobby against the GSC's goals, using their vast resources to stall policy changes and prevent the widespread adoption of renewable energy. There were political figures who claimed that the world's focus on sustainability was a luxury that no nation could afford in the face of other, more immediate challenges. Elon knew these battles were inevitable, but he also knew that progress, once started, had a momentum of its own. The key to success was not only in technological advancements, but in changing hearts and minds. The message needed to be clear. The future wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving. And thriving meant embracing the new, not clinging to the old. As he sat at the head of the table during yet another intense meeting, Elon's resolve grew stronger. There were always going to be roadblocks. There would always be resistance to change. But he was no longer fighting alone. The entire world, from leaders to activists to everyday citizens, was standing beside him, pushing for a future that was not just possible, but inevitable. That night, after the meeting, Elon sat alone in his office, contemplating the long road ahead. The weight of the world's problems was heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time, he felt a sense of hope. There were still hurdles to overcome, but the collective action that was taking shape gave him confidence that humanity could rise to meet the challenges. He picked up his phone and texted Leah Wilson, the environmental activist who had become a key ally in the GSC. "The world is waking up, Leah. It's not going to be easy, but we've got this." Her response came almost immediately, one step at a time. "We're in this together." And in that moment, Elon realized the truth of what he had said all along. The future of humanity wasn't a solo endeavor. It was a shared mission, one that required everyone to come together and embrace the unknown, to face the challenges and opportunities of the future with courage and hope. The momentum behind the Global Sustainability Coalition, GSC, had undeniably shifted the course of history. Yet, with progress came new, unexpected challenges. The political landscape had become more polarized than ever, as certain factions resisted the global transformation in favor of preserving traditional industries, some of which contributed heavily to the global economy. Elon Musk found himself at the intersection of technological innovation and political friction, and as much as he had hoped for smooth sailing, he knew the road ahead would be filled with bumps, some small and some colossal. It was no longer just about building electric vehicles or space exploration. It was about changing how the world worked, fundamentally, and that required an unwavering resolve. The biggest challenge that Elon and the coalition faced was uniting the world's diverse leaders behind a single, cohesive vision. In many ways, the GSC had done more than he could have imagined. It had attracted attention, inspired action, and connected millions of people around the world who were willing to make change happen. But now, the complexity of actually implementing those changes was beginning to rear its head. Elon stood in front of a video screen in his office, watching a live broadcast of the latest United Nations Climate Summit. The speech he had given months ago had helped set the tone for global cooperation, but now the political theater surrounding climate action was reaching new heights of tension. While some nations were eager to join forces, others remained entrenched in their old ways, unwilling to let go of fossil fuels. One of the most vocal opponents, Senator Richard Hawke from the United States, had repeatedly criticized the GSC's ambitious goals, claiming that the economic impact of moving away from oil and gas would devastate working-class Americans. "There's a fundamental misunderstanding happening here," Elon said aloud, talking to himself. "Sustainability is about more than just saving the planet. It's about saving people. New industries, new jobs, and better living standards. Why can't they see that?" His frustration was palpable. He had been deeply involved in designing the transition plans for workers displaced by industries like coal and oil. Tesla's solar technology, the advancements in battery storage, and the rise of electric vehicles weren't just alternatives to fossil fuels. They were pathways to an entirely new economy. But the entrenched systems of power were resistant to change. The oil industry, in particular, had deep roots, and their lobbying power was formidable. But Elon knew that the real solution lay in engaging those very industries. The goal was never to simply dismantle existing power structures. It was about evolving them, finding ways to reimagine energy, infrastructure, and jobs in a way that would benefit everyone, regardless of past affiliations. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a message from Leah Wilson, who had been one of the most steadfast advocates for the GSC's work. "Elon, we have to meet. There's something happening behind the scenes that could jeopardize everything we've worked for." Elon's mind raced. He immediately scheduled a private meeting with Leah at SpaceX headquarters. When Leah arrived, her face was grave. There's an alliance forming between some of the most powerful oil and gas companies and certain governments that are actively pushing back against the transition to renewable energy. They're working on a new strategy, claiming that climate change isn't the existential threat we've been led to believe. They're making the case that the economic and social costs of going green will outweigh the benefits. Elon frowned. They're trying to sow doubt again. It's the same playbook. Leah nodded. Exactly. And it's working on some fronts. Public opinion is divided. Some people are starting to question whether a radical shift is really necessary. What's even worse is that they're trying to convince countries that already have a strong reliance on fossil fuels to slow down their commitments to renewable energy, claiming it will hurt their economic development. Elon sat back, his mind racing. He had known the opposition wouldn't go away quietly, but this was more coordinated than he had imagined. So, what do we do now? He asked, his voice steady but focused. We double down, Leah replied without hesitation. We push forward even harder. But we need to broaden the coalition. We can't just rely on governments or businesses. We need to bring people into the conversation, make them part of the solution. If the global public demands action, it'll be harder for politicians and corporate leaders to ignore them. Elon paused, contemplating her words. He realized she was right. The key to overcoming these setbacks wasn't just top-down policies or corporate partnerships. It was the people themselves. The strength of the movement lay in the power of individuals, communities, and grassroots organizations. They were the ones who could challenge entrenched power structures and make their voices heard. We'll need a campaign, Elon said, determination in his voice. A global movement, bigger than anything we've done so far. We need to make it impossible for anyone to ignore. The momentum is there. We just need to amplify it. And amplify it they did. Leah and Elon worked tirelessly to orchestrate a worldwide movement, tapping into every available platform to raise awareness and call for urgent action. They partnered with international organizations, environmental activists, local governments, and business leaders who were already on board. Elon made appearances at key global events, advocating for urgent climate action and championing the solutions that were already in play. But this time, they focused less on talking about the science behind climate change and more on the people it would affect. They put a human face on the struggle, from workers in coal mining towns to families in coastal cities at risk of rising sea levels. They showed the world what was at stake, and that everyone, no matter their position, had something to gain from a transition to a sustainable, green economy. The result was staggering. People across the globe took to the streets in peaceful protests and rallies. Thousands of petitions were signed. Students, professionals, and parents alike rallied behind the cause. The GSC's social media presence exploded with messages of support, creating a platform where citizens could voice their concerns, share solutions, and demand change. It was a groundswell of support, with one common goal: a sustainable future for all. Elon found himself watching the progress from his office, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. For the first time, he understood the true power of collective action. The voices of individuals, when united in purpose, could overcome the most formidable opposition. But he also knew the battle was far from over. The opposition was fierce, and the fight for a sustainable future would be long and challenging. Yet, as Elon watched videos of the marches, the protests, and the global conversations unfolding, he felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just a fight for the planet. It was a fight for humanity's future. The global sustainability movement, now an undeniable force, was gaining traction. But with progress came the inevitable backlash from those who felt threatened by the rapidly changing world. The oil and gas industries, in particular, were facing the greatest pressure, and they weren't going down without a fight. As Elon Musk and the Global Sustainability Coalition, GSC, pushed forward, the stakes were rising, and so was the intensity of the opposition. Elon had known the road would not be without obstacles, but as the political and corporate pushback gained momentum, it became clear that the battle for the planet's future would be far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The first signs of organized resistance began to emerge after the global march for climate action. While the events themselves were overwhelmingly peaceful and filled with hope, there was an undercurrent of anger and frustration brewing among those who had most to lose from the green transition. The oil giants were not silent. They were mobilizing their vast resources to prevent a transformation they viewed as a direct threat to their financial power. One particularly influential group, the World Energy Coalition, WEC, made their presence known through a coordinated media campaign designed to sow doubt. Their narrative was simple but effective. The push for renewable energy was not only impractical, it was dangerous. They warned of energy shortages, economic collapse, and a catastrophic rise in unemployment if fossil fuels were phased out too quickly. Elon's phone buzzed as Leah Wilson, his longtime ally and environmental activist, sent him a message that made his heart race. They've just launched their first full-scale attack. You're the target, Elon. They're blaming you for the collapse of the economy and the loss of jobs. It's all over the news. Elon's mind went into overdrive. The WEC had built an empire on the backs of fossil fuels. And now, they were trying to dismantle everything he had worked for. His success with Tesla and SpaceX had made him a public figure, and that made him a target. He had been expecting this kind of backlash, but the intensity and sophistication of the attack caught him off guard. Later that evening, Elon sat in his private office, watching a news broadcast. The rhetoric had shifted from skepticism to outright hostility. Analysts, former politicians, and industry leaders were lining up to denounce the GSC's efforts. They spoke of the economic devastation that would occur if the world transitioned away from fossil fuels too quickly, and many painted Elon as the villain, blaming him for pushing the radical green agenda that they claimed was ruining the global economy. "I never signed up for this," Elon muttered under his breath. He had always been prepared to face criticism. After all, anyone who dared to challenge the status quo was bound to ruffle some feathers. But this felt different. The attacks were personal, and the consequences were real. People believed these lies. It wasn't just about winning an argument anymore. It was about winning over public trust. He picked up his phone and dialed Leah. When she answered, he could hear the urgency in her voice. "Elon, this is bigger than we thought. The WEC isn't just spreading misinformation. They're pulling strings behind the scenes, lobbying governments to delay the green transition and encouraging misinformation campaigns in the media. If we don't act fast, we risk losing the momentum we've built." Elon sighed, his shoulders heavy with the weight of the situation. "I know. It's starting to feel like a war of attrition, but I won't back down." "We can't fight them with their own tactics," Leah said firmly. "We have to make our case stronger, through facts, yes, but also through the stories of real people who are already benefiting from the green transition. People who have seen their communities revitalized because of sustainable industries. We need a new campaign, one that reaches beyond just the facts and appeals to the human side of this movement." The next few days were a blur. Elon found himself navigating a wave of media interviews, public statements, and strategy meetings. Despite the growing opposition, he refused to retreat. Instead, he focused on what he knew to be true. The future of humanity was tied to sustainability, and no amount of fear-mongering could change that. To combat the misinformation, the GSC launched a new initiative, The Real Story of Change. This campaign would focus on personal testimonies from individuals who had seen their lives improved through the adoption of clean energy technologies, sustainable agriculture, and renewable industries. The aim was to humanize the conversation and shift the narrative from fear of the unknown to hope for a better, more equitable future. Tesla executives, SpaceX engineers, and activists from all over the world rallied to share their stories of transformation. The people featured in the campaign weren't just CEOs or activists. They were ordinary citizens, from factory workers to farmers, from small business owners to retirees. Each of them had experienced the benefits of the green revolution firsthand, and they were ready to stand up and speak out. As the campaign began to roll out, the public response was overwhelming. On social media, people shared their personal stories of how renewable energy had lowered their utility bills, or how new green technologies had created jobs in their communities. There were videos of rural farmers who had switched to solar-powered irrigation systems, cutting their costs and increasing their crop yields. Teachers, doctors, and engineers posted about how they were part of the green transition and how it was helping their families and local economies thrive. Elon's voice was among the loudest in the campaign. He didn't just speak of innovation. He spoke of the people who would benefit from it. He appeared on global platforms, from television interviews to podcasts, where he spoke not just as an entrepreneur, but as someone who believed deeply in the power of humanity to solve its biggest challenges. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt like the underdog. It wasn't just about selling a product or achieving a personal goal. It was about something far greater. The attacks from the WEC and their allies fueled him, pushing him to fight harder, to make sure the people's voices were heard. But the fight was far from over. The opposition wasn't just using media campaigns. They were influencing policy as well. Several governments, particularly in countries that were major producers of oil, began pushing back against the GSC's goals, claiming that the economic benefits of fossil fuel exports would be sacrificed if they fully embraced renewable energy. Elon found himself in countless meetings with government leaders, explaining why the shift to a green economy was not just viable, but necessary. "We're not asking you to give up your economy," he would say, looking directly at the skeptical politicians. "We're asking you to evolve it. The world is changing, and we have a chance to be at the forefront of that change." He could see that many of them were still uncertain, but slowly, one by one, he began to see the cracks in their resistance. There was a shift, albeit a slow one, in how the leaders were approaching the issue. They were beginning to understand that they couldn't ignore the inevitability of the future. They would either choose to lead it or be left behind. One night, as Elon sat at his desk, staring at a report on the growing resistance, Leah called him. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable sense of resolve. "Elon, we're winning. Slowly but surely, we're turning the tide. People are starting to see through the fear. We're not just fighting for the planet anymore. We're fighting for a future of opportunity and hope. And no matter what they throw at us, we won't back down." Elon smiled. He knew she was right. The battle for the planet's future had only just begun, but they had something far more powerful than any opposition. They had the collective will of the people. And that, he realized, was the force that would ultimately win the day. The world was holding its breath. The past few months had been filled with tense moments, a fierce battle of ideologies and interests that threatened to derail the global movement for sustainability. Elon Musk, who had once been an outlier, a pioneer of bold ideas, now found himself at the center of a revolution. He had survived the attacks, the smear campaigns, the opposition. But the real test was yet to come. The coalition of fossil fuel interests, led by the World Energy Coalition, WEC, had launched its final push, attempting to quash the momentum the GSC had built. However, for the first time since the early days of the movement, Elon could feel something shift in the air. It was as if the world was on the cusp of something monumental. In the wake of the recent media battles, the GSC's The Real Story of Change campaign had gained unprecedented traction. It was no longer just about convincing world leaders. The movement had permeated the everyday lives of millions. The stories of hope, progress, and real-world success from individuals, families, and businesses who had embraced green technologies resonated deeply with the public. It was no longer just about the environment. It was about human dignity, empowerment, and a better future for all. Elon, now at the helm of an unstoppable wave of transformation, stood in front of a screen displaying a global map of ongoing renewable energy projects. It was breathtaking. The numbers were staggering. What had started as an ambitious vision was becoming a reality. Thousands of new jobs were being created, renewable energy adoption was growing faster than ever before, and entire communities were being revitalized. "Elon, we've done it," Leah said, her voice crackling through the phone. "The momentum is building in every corner of the globe. People are waking up. We're on the verge of something huge." But Elon knew the battle wasn't over yet. He was seeing progress, yes, but there was one last hurdle: convincing the remaining governments and powerful industries still clinging to the past. The oil and gas giants were powerful, entrenched in decades of economic influence. They had the ability to slow progress, and worse, to make the transition feel like a threat. However, Elon had learned over the years that true change didn't come from waiting for approval. It came from proving that a better path was not only possible but inevitable. That's when the unthinkable happened. The tipping point. The global response was overwhelming. The pressure from the public reached a boiling point, and people began demanding action like never before. Governments that had previously been on the fence began to move. In the United States, Even some of the most powerful political figures who had once been vocal opponents of the green transition started acknowledging the need for change. In Europe, where the push for green energy had already gained traction, politicians began implementing policies that prioritized renewable energy over fossil fuels, and their respective economies didn't just hold steady, they thrived. But the breakthrough came when a coalition of global leaders, spurred by widespread public outcry and grassroots movements, announced the formation of a global carbon pricing initiative. The deal was historic. For the first time, nations around the world had agreed on a uniform system for taxing carbon emissions, with revenues going directly into renewable energy projects, green infrastructure, and global environmental protection efforts. For Elon, this announcement was the culmination of everything he had been working toward. It wasn't just about the success of a single company or one industry. It was about a paradigm shift, a complete reimagining of the global economy that favored sustainability, equity, and long-term growth. The movement was no longer a fringe idea. It was the future. In a meeting with his closest advisors, Elon couldn't hide the satisfaction in his voice as he reflected on the journey. "We've done it," he said, his tone quieter than usual. "We've taken a stand against the old world, and we've proven that there is no going back. The question now is, how fast can we scale this? How fast can we change the world?" Leah, sitting across from him, smiled. "It's happening faster than we ever dreamed. The future is now." But the most significant victory came from the people who had been with him every step of the way. The workers in clean energy industries, the scientists, the activists, the entrepreneurs, and the communities who had embraced the idea that the future could be better, cleaner, and more equitable. In a quiet moment, Elon reflected on what the journey had meant for him personally. In the beginning, it had been about building companies, achieving success, and pushing the boundaries of technology. But now, as he looked at the millions of people who were beginning to see the fruits of the green revolution, he realized that the true power of this movement wasn't in the technology, it was in the people. It was in the collective will of humanity to protect the planet, to fight for a future that was sustainable for generations to come. And in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt before: peace. The knowledge that they had created something bigger than any single individual or organization, a global movement for good. In the months that followed, the tipping point became a flood of change. Nations raced to meet their carbon reduction goals. Companies that had once fought against the transition to renewable energy were now embracing it, making investments in solar, wind, and electric technologies. Communities, once divided over the issue, found common ground in the shared purpose of building a better future. Elon, ever the visionary, shifted his focus from immediate wins to the long-term implications of what had been accomplished. SpaceX was working on initiatives to make space travel more sustainable. Tesla's innovations in electric vehicle technology were helping to set new standards for the automotive industry. SolarCity's solar infrastructure projects were now powering entire cities. Even the opposition from the oil and gas industries began to falter. As they saw the public demand for change grow louder, many of the industry's largest players began investing in green technologies, realizing that to survive, they had to adapt or perish. The world had turned its gaze toward the future, and the future was sustainable. In a final, powerful moment, Elon Musk addressed the world through a live broadcast. His message was simple but profound. This is the beginning. The work isn't finished. The real challenge is not just to innovate, but to keep the world moving forward, with all of us in mind. Let's make sure that we leave behind a world worth inheriting. For Elon, the answer had always been clear. The future was no longer an abstract dream. It was something tangible, achievable, and now, within their grasp. But the question of how to keep moving forward remained. The answer, he realized, was simple. It would take humanity. It would take every single person who was willing to be part of the solution, to embrace the changes ahead, and to work together for the good of all. The world had arrived at the tipping point, but now, it was up to everyone to make sure that the momentum continued to push them forward. The fight for the planet's future was far from over, but with hope, determination, and innovation, they had the power to shape it into a reality no one could have imagined just a few years ago. The road ahead was long, but the future had never looked brighter. The world had crossed a threshold, but what came next was just as important as the journey that had brought them here. The tipping point had sparked a global transformation, but now the real work was beginning. Governments were now fully committed to sustainability. Industry giants that once resisted were making massive investments into clean energy. The public had rallied behind the cause, with communities and individuals stepping up to build a new, better world. But Elon knew that transformation on a global scale could not be taken for granted. It was time to redefine the future. It was a crisp autumn morning when Elon stood before a crowd in Berlin, Germany, for the Global Sustainability Summit. The eyes of the world were upon him. Leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens from every corner of the globe. It was the largest gathering of its kind, a summit that marked the first anniversary of the historic Global Carbon Pricing Initiative. The excitement in the air was palpable, but so were the stakes. Elon knew that this summit would be a moment that would either solidify their progress or derail it entirely. The recent victories, while significant, had been but a first step. The world needed concrete plans, scalable solutions, and relentless drive to continue the work of decarbonizing every aspect of life. Today, he would lay out the vision for the next phase of the movement, a vision that would transcend individual countries, corporations, and technologies. As Elon took the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. He was no longer just the CEO of companies. He was the face of a movement, a leader for the future of the planet. His words would set the tone for the next chapter. "Thank you," Elon began, raising his hand to quiet the room. "Thank you for the incredible work we've all done together. But I want to make one thing very clear. The hard work has only just begun." The room went still, the weight of his words sinking in. "We've made extraordinary progress," he continued, "but there's still so much to be done. We've shifted the conversation from resistance to action, but we must now accelerate our efforts. The future of humanity doesn't rest in the hands of a few innovators or even a few governments. It rests in the hands of all of us, working together." He paused, letting the words settle. Elon knew that now, more than ever, he needed to inspire hope, not just talk about numbers and goals. We are now in a race against time. The next few decades will determine the course of the next few centuries. If we are to succeed, we must redefine what it means to be a global society. We must reimagine everything: how we live, how we work, how we educate our children, how we build cities, how we treat our planet. We cannot afford to wait for someone else to solve these problems. We must all take responsibility. It's time to get to work, together. The applause was deafening. The crowd's energy was infectious. As Elon looked out over the sea of people, he realized that this was no longer just about convincing world leaders or corporations to change. This was about igniting a collective movement that would reach every person on Earth, showing them that their actions mattered, that they could be part of something much bigger than themselves. And the solutions, he knew, were already within reach. Solar, wind, electric vehicles, energy storage. They weren't just ideas. They were technologies already changing the world. But now, the challenge was scaling them on an unprecedented level to meet the needs of billions of people. After the summit, Elon spent the next few months touring the world, visiting countries, companies, and local communities that were leading the way in the green revolution. His team at Tesla was working at full throttle, ensuring that the energy transition was not just happening in the developed world, but in emerging markets as well. They were building solar infrastructure, powering homes and schools, and helping countries leapfrog traditional energy systems in favor of cleaner, sustainable alternatives. His visit to India was particularly transformative. As one of the largest and fastest-growing countries in the world, India had long been held back by a lack of infrastructure and unreliable access to energy. But with the GSC's help, they were now rolling out large-scale solar farms and energy storage projects in rural areas, providing affordable, reliable power to millions of people who had never had access to electricity before. Elon met with local farmers who had transitioned to solar-powered irrigation systems, reducing water waste and increasing their yields. He spoke with students in newly electrified classrooms, whose futures were now brighter thanks to reliable energy. And he visited factories where clean energy was powering production lines, reducing emissions and creating new green jobs. The scale of the transformation was humbling. What had once been impossible was now a reality. And India was just one example of what could be achieved when the world came together to prioritize sustainability. Despite the progress, there were still challenges. Governments in some regions were struggling to balance the demands of the green revolution with the political realities of their constituencies. The fossil fuel industry was still pushing back, though with decreasing effectiveness. And while public support for green policies had never been higher, there was still a vocal minority that was resistant to change. But as Elon continued to witness the transformations around the globe, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for the future of the planet was not a sprint, it was a marathon. And with every new project, every new initiative, they were moving closer to the finish line. One of the most significant milestones came when the United Nations, alongside the GSC, launched the Global Green Cities Initiative, a massive effort to redesign urban spaces around sustainability. The initiative would focus on creating cities that were powered entirely by renewable energy, with integrated green technologies that minimized waste and maximized efficiency. It wasn't just about reducing carbon emissions. It was about building spaces where people could thrive, where clean air, clean water, and access to green spaces were a given, not a luxury. Elon played a central role in the initiative, working alongside architects, urban planners, and technology experts to develop smart city solutions that could be replicated around the world. The goal was nothing less than to create the blueprint for the cities of tomorrow. Cities that would be resilient in the face of climate change. Cities where people could live in harmony with the planet. As the project gained momentum, Elon realized that the work being done today would shape the lives of future generations. His children, their children, and their children's children would grow up in a world that was fundamentally different from the one he had inherited. And that, he knew, was the true legacy of the movement they had started. One quiet evening, as Elon sat in his office overlooking a solar farm outside his window, Leah called him. There was an unmistakable excitement in her voice. Elon, we're hearing reports from every corner of the world. People are ready. People are mobilizing. Governments are moving faster than we ever thought possible. We are on the edge of something that is truly going to change everything. Elon smiled, knowing that the journey was far from over. But in that moment, he felt something profound, hope, not just for what they had accomplished, but for what lay ahead. The world was on the brink of something extraordinary, and they had all chosen to be part of it. As the world continued to adapt to the green revolution, the energy surrounding the movement seemed to take on a life of its own. What had begun as a challenge, one that Elon Musk and his allies had faced with relentless determination, was now a global force. A collective effort that was no longer just about one individual or even a few corporations, but about millions of people around the world, united in their desire for change. The ripple effect had begun. Elon's phone buzzed relentlessly as he sat in his conference room, his gaze fixed on a series of projections that mapped out the exponential growth of renewable energy adoption across the globe. New solar farms, wind turbines, electric vehicle fleets, and grid storage projects were sprouting up everywhere. Every corner of the world seemed to be in motion, moving towards a future powered by clean energy. But as much as the numbers and data fueled his hope, he knew that the fight for the future required more than just infrastructure. The ripple effect, the real force behind change, lay in the hearts and minds of people, the individuals who, despite the obstacles, had embraced the cause. It was the everyday people who were taking small actions that were adding up to something massive. Elon thought back to the community meetings he'd attended in various cities across the world. He remembered the woman in Mexico who had converted her home into a solar-powered sanctuary for her family. He thought of the entrepreneur in India who had opened a small business that recycled plastic into eco-friendly building materials. These people weren't just passive supporters of the green revolution. They were active participants. They were showing the world that the future didn't need to be built on grand plans alone. It could be built through action, unity, and the persistence of individuals. Meanwhile, across the globe, the GSC, Global Sustainability Coalition, had seen unprecedented success. More and more countries were signing on to the initiative, committing to green energy targets that would shape the decades to come. The United States, once one of the largest carbon emitters, had made remarkable strides. The European Union was spearheading a rapid transition to green economies, while nations in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America were finding innovative ways to leapfrog outdated technologies. Elon couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride, knowing that they had helped shift the narrative from one of pessimism to one of possibility. The constant challenges they had faced were still there, but the momentum of progress was undeniable. Renewable energy was no longer a niche, it was the future. And that future was unfolding before their eyes. But even as things looked promising, there were still obstacles to overcome. Despite the global push, the fossil fuel industry remained a formidable adversary. Many governments were still reluctant to completely sever ties with oil and gas, either due to political pressure or economic interests. The Green Revolution was moving forward, but it wasn't a clean break from the past. It was a careful, strategic evolution. Elon knew that, more than ever, the GSC needed to push forward with unity and determination. If they were going to finish the job, they needed to focus on building the coalitions that would ensure the future was sustainable for all people, not just the wealthy or the privileged. One afternoon, while having a strategic meeting with the GSC's leadership, Elon laid out his next challenge. He wanted to create a global alliance, one that would harness the combined power of technology, government, and grassroots organizations to tackle the most pressing issues of climate change. It wasn't enough to just transition to renewable energy. The whole system needed to change, from food production to transportation, from water management to urban planning. This would be the ultimate test of how deep their resolve truly went. Leah, we need to start thinking bigger. Our successes so far have been remarkable, but the real challenge is integrating sustainability into every part of life. We need to reshape our systems, not just our energy sources. People need to feel that this is not just a tech revolution, but a human revolution. A movement that empowers them and shows that change isn't just something that's happening around them, but something that's happening with them. Leah nodded, her eyes focused. You're right. We're at a point where the shift can't just be top-down. It has to be grassroots, with people leading the charge in their communities. Elon's vision was ambitious, but it was this vision that would become the cornerstone of the Unity Initiative, an ambitious effort to empower every person on Earth to be an active part of the solution. The goal was simple. If every individual could contribute in some way, no matter how small, the ripple effect would grow until it became a global wave. It wasn't just about shifting from fossil fuels to renewable sources. It was about creating a new societal framework. It was about ensuring that every person, no matter their economic background or geographic location, had the opportunity to contribute to the greater good. Whether it was through energy-efficient technologies, waste reduction, or sustainable food systems, every action mattered. And so, the GSC partnered with local governments, grassroots organizations, and corporations to launch the Unity Initiative. It was a campaign designed to empower people at the community level, offering tools, education, and resources to make sustainability accessible to everyone. In schools, local hubs, online platforms, and even through media, people were encouraged to take part in simple actions, switching to renewable energy, reducing waste, supporting sustainable agriculture. At its core, the initiative was about showing people that their individual choices could collectively change the world. As the months passed, the impact of the Unity Initiative began to be felt around the globe. More and more people were getting involved, from simple acts like planting trees to complex actions like implementing solar microgrids in underserved regions. Elon saw firsthand the power of these collective actions during a visit to a small rural town in Africa, where local farmers had started using solar-powered irrigation systems. The ripple effect of this grassroots change was profound. Not only were these farmers increasing their crop yields and income, but they were also inspiring neighboring villages to adopt the same methods. Elon couldn't help but marvel at how small actions, when multiplied by millions of people, were having an outsized impact. It was as if the world had finally come together with a shared purpose, and the momentum was unstoppable. One of the most profound moments came when the first carbon-neutral city was completed in Northern Europe. The city, designed with sustainability at its heart, featured renewable energy, green transportation, waste-free systems, and carbon-negative building practices. Elon was invited to the grand opening, and as he walked through the city, he was filled with a sense of awe. This was the future, a future where cities weren't just places to live, but ecosystems designed to sustain life. When asked by reporters about the project, Elon's response was simple. This is what happens when we all work together. This city represents not just a technological achievement, but a collective vision for a better, more sustainable world. As the movement spread, Elon felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It was no longer just about meeting goals or hitting targets. It was about creating a legacy, a foundation upon which future generations could build. The change they had started was no longer just a hope. It was becoming a reality, one that would shape the world for centuries to come. But even as the ripple effect continued to spread, Elon knew that the fight was far from over. The global challenges of climate change, inequality, and resource depletion were immense. Yet, for the first time, he felt that the world was truly moving in the right direction. The road ahead would be long, but the collective power of humanity was stronger than ever. The work was not finished, but with unity, action, and hope, they were well on their way to transforming the world. As the momentum for change grew stronger, Elon knew they were approaching a critical moment in their journey. The Green Revolution, with all its advances, had reached a point where the hardest challenges remained, the last mile, as he called it. The future of the planet rested on whether they could finish the race. Elon's work had always been a series of challenges, moments where breakthroughs occurred, but also where deep doubts and failures tested his resolve. The Green Revolution was no different. Despite the global success of renewable energy projects, cities built on sustainable principles, and grassroots efforts thriving across the globe, the fight was far from over. There were those who resisted, who clung to the past, and who sought to undermine the progress that had been made. It was during this pivotal time that a new crisis emerged. The last vestiges of the fossil fuel industry, which had already begun to lose its grip on the world, fought back with renewed aggression. Global oil companies, coal industries, and even some countries that still depended heavily on carbon-based resources were attempting to sabotage the movement. From misinformation campaigns to lobbying politicians, they were trying to turn the tide. But Elon had always believed that the toughest moments were also the moments that shaped history. And this was no different. This wasn't just about energy anymore. It was about something bigger, about whether humanity could face its greatest challenge and succeed. In a high-stakes meeting at the GSC headquarters, Elon sat with Leah, Kai, and a few key leaders of the coalition, analyzing the latest reports. Data indicated that fossil fuel companies had intensified their efforts, funding anti-green movements, sowing confusion, and planting fear in developing countries that relied on oil exports for their economies. The pressure on governments to resist the transition was mounting. "I've seen this play before," Elon said, tapping a report with his finger. "They're trying to undermine the whole thing, to make people doubt whether the green transition is really possible. They're pulling out every stop to delay this process." Leah, who had been his closest ally through this whole journey, looked up from the table with a determined look on her face. "We knew this would happen. It's no surprise. The question now is how we respond." Kai, who had been quietly analyzing the reports, added, "It's not just about countering their efforts. It's about showing the world that the alternative is better. We've made tremendous progress, but we need to push the message harder. We need to show people that renewable energy isn't just the right choice. It's the smart one." Elon nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. "We need to mobilize on all fronts. We have the technology, the support, and the momentum. What we need now is to highlight the tangible benefits of this transition. How it's already improving lives, how it's reducing costs, and how it's creating jobs. People need to see that they're not just supporting the future, they're investing in it." As the GSC prepared for its next global summit, the goal was clear: to push the conversation beyond just environmental concerns and frame it as an economic opportunity, a way forward that could benefit everyone, from the poorest nations to the richest corporations. Elon understood that the key to overcoming the fossil fuel resistance was to shift the focus from fear to opportunity. They needed to show that the green transition was not a burden but a massive opportunity for growth and prosperity. The Global Green Economic Forum, held in Berlin, was the moment they had all been working toward. Elon took the stage in front of an audience of world leaders, business executives, environmental activists, and journalists. He could feel the weight of the moment. The future, once uncertain, now rested in the hands of the people who were about to make decisions that would shape the coming decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elon began, his voice calm but resolute. We stand at the crossroads of history. The path before us is clear, but it's up to all of us to choose it. He paused, letting the words sink in. For far too long, we've been told that the cost of going green is too high, that the transition is too difficult, that it's not feasible. But I'm here to tell you that the opposite is true. We've already proven that renewable energy is not just a possibility, it's a reality. And now, we are proving that it is the future of our economy. The crowd listened intently. By embracing clean energy, we are not only securing a sustainable future, we are unlocking new industries, new jobs, and a new economy that is better for everyone. From solar energy to electric vehicles, from sustainable agriculture to smart cities, the green economy is the fastest-growing sector in the world. And I ask you this: why should we allow those who are invested in the past to hold us back from this new era? Elon's words were met with applause, but he knew that the real work lay in convincing the skeptics and overcoming the challenges ahead. The fossil fuel industry wasn't going to give up easily, and the next few years would determine whether the green transition could continue to grow at the pace required to reverse the damage done to the planet. It was clear that the fight would be long, but Elon was determined. He had spent his life breaking barriers, from electric cars to space travel. Now, he was determined to break through the barriers standing between humanity and a sustainable future. As the summit continued, the GSC rolled out a series of initiatives aimed at accelerating the green transition. They launched a new global fund to invest in clean energy projects in developing countries, provided incentives for businesses to adopt sustainable practices, and unveiled new programs to help workers transition from fossil fuel industries to green jobs. The goal was to make the green revolution accessible to everyone, not just the privileged few. At the same time, Elon's team at Tesla had already been expanding production of electric vehicles and energy storage solutions. They had made tremendous strides in reducing costs and increasing efficiency, and now the goal was to make clean energy accessible on a global scale. Every city, every home, every factory, and every vehicle would one day run on clean energy. And they were getting closer to making that vision a reality. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Elon stood on the balcony of his hotel in Berlin, looking out over the skyline. It had been a turbulent year, full of challenges and triumphs, but he knew they were on the edge of something monumental. In the distance, the lights of the city twinkled, a reminder of how far they had come. And yet, he knew the last mile would be the hardest. The next few years would require even more work, more innovation, and more determination. But as he looked out over the horizon, he felt a sense of peace. They were not just fighting for a better world, they were building it. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something they were shaping, together. The Green Revolution had gathered momentum, but even in the brightest moments of progress, there were unforeseen consequences. The ripple effect of change that had begun in the corners of the world now echoed louder, reverberating through the corridors of power, industry, and the very systems that had once seemed invulnerable. Elon Musk sat in a crowded boardroom in a high-rise building, staring at the data projected on the screen in front of him. The progress in clean energy adoption was extraordinary. Cities were becoming more sustainable, electric vehicles were flooding the streets, and fossil fuel consumption had been steadily dropping in many parts of the world. It was clear that they were on the brink of something huge, a revolution that could reshape the entire world. However, there was something in the numbers that unsettled him. Despite the successes, there were still substantial hurdles ahead, specifically, the very industries and infrastructures that the green movement had disrupted. Renewable energy was now cheaper and more efficient than fossil fuels in many places, but some sectors were feeling the strain of such rapid change. One of the most glaring challenges had emerged in the oil-rich regions of the world. Countries that had once depended on their vast reserves of oil and gas were now struggling to transition to a more sustainable economic model. The shift away from fossil fuels had left millions of people without jobs, and entire economies were teetering on the brink of collapse. While some nations had embraced the green revolution with open arms, others had resisted, leading to growing tensions. Elon had always known that change would come with sacrifices, but he hadn't anticipated the social and economic upheaval that would accompany the transition. As the world leaned into renewable energy, some communities felt left behind, and the gap between the wealthy, who could afford to lead the way in adopting new technologies, and the disenfranchised, who couldn't, had widened. Leah sat beside Elon, reviewing the reports that had been handed to them by GSC members in developing nations. "It's happening everywhere," she said, looking up at him. "While we're winning the battle on the energy front, we're seeing more resistance in these regions. They're feeling left out. We're talking about sustainable energy, but the reality is that many of these places don't even have access to clean water, let alone clean energy." The situation was dire. In countries that had long relied on oil exports for revenue, entire communities were experiencing economic decline as the demand for fossil fuels plummeted. People were protesting in the streets, and local leaders were demanding compensation for the losses their countries had suffered as a result of the green transition. Elon had always believed in the power of technology to uplift people, but he realized that technology alone wasn't enough to overcome the deep-rooted inequalities that had been created by centuries of reliance on oil. He leaned forward in his chair, his mind racing. They had built a movement that was designed to save the planet, but in doing so, they had unintentionally created new challenges, ones that demanded a different kind of solution. A solution that wasn't just about energy. It was about people. The answer lay in something Elon had always championed: innovation. If renewable energy could transform the world, then why couldn't technology also be the key to helping these struggling nations adapt and thrive? They could build the future together, one that included everyone, not just those who had been able to ride the wave of technological advancement. Elon called an emergency meeting with key members of the GSC and other thought leaders. "We need to think outside the box," he said. "The solution isn't just about green energy. It's about empowering these communities with the tools they need to adapt and thrive. Renewable energy is just one part of the equation. We need to think about education, infrastructure, and economic development. What if we could create entire ecosystems around sustainability? What if we could build industries that aren't just green, but inclusive?" Kai spoke up. "You're suggesting a complete overhaul of their economies, not just an energy transition. That would require investment on a scale we haven't even considered before." "I know," Elon said, his mind still working through the complexity of the issue. "But if we're serious about transforming the world, we need to approach this from all angles. If we build solar farms in remote regions, we can generate electricity, but we can also create jobs. If we focus on education and local innovation, we can teach these communities to become leaders in green technologies. We can't leave them behind. We need to bring them into the fold." Leah nodded, her face serious. "This is a massive challenge, but you're right. We can't just build the future for a few. It's got to be for everyone." Elon's vision was bold, but it was the only way forward. They needed to create a multifaceted solution that would not only accelerate the green revolution, but also ensure that it was inclusive. The goal was to build entire sustainable economies that could withstand the challenges of the transition, economies that provided education, jobs, and infrastructure to those most at risk. The plan would require collaboration on a scale that had never been attempted before. Governments, international organizations, corporations, and local communities would all need to come together to create a blueprint for a truly sustainable world. The goal was not just to save the planet, but to do so in a way that gave everyone the opportunity to thrive. Over the next few months, the GSC launched a new initiative called Green Ecosystem Development. The project would focus on creating self-sustaining communities in vulnerable regions, providing access to renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, education, and economic opportunities. The goal was to give these communities the tools they needed to become self-reliant, while also integrating them into the global green economy. Tesla, SpaceX, and other GSC partners would help by providing technologies, infrastructure, and expertise. The initiative would also focus on capacity building, training local leaders to become advocates for change in their own regions. In one of the pilot regions, a rural area in Africa, the first green ecosystem began to take shape. Solar-powered irrigation systems were set up, helping local farmers grow crops even in the harshest conditions. Education programs were rolled out to teach young people about renewable energy, sustainable farming, and the possibilities of new technologies. And with the help of the GSC, small businesses began to emerge, built on sustainable practices that could grow and prosper. The impact of these projects was felt almost immediately. The local economy began to show signs of growth as new jobs were created and the standard of living improved. But perhaps the most powerful change was seen in the way the community embraced the transformation. People who had once been skeptical about renewable energy and technology now saw the potential in these innovations. One evening, Elon visited the region to see the progress firsthand. He met with the local leaders and spoke to the farmers, the teachers, and the young entrepreneurs who had become the backbone of this new ecosystem. As he walked through the bustling community, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This was more than just an energy revolution. It was a revolution of opportunity. "This is what I've been fighting for," he said quietly to Leah, who stood beside him. Leah smiled, looking around. "This is what we've all been fighting for." But even as the Green Ecosystem Initiative showed early signs of success, Elon knew the challenges were far from over. The resistance from the fossil fuel industry was still fierce, and there were countless obstacles ahead. The fight for a sustainable world wasn't won yet. It was still in the balance. As Elon reflected on the progress made so far, he knew that they were at a tipping point. The decisions made now would determine whether the green revolution would continue to grow, or whether it would be stifled by the forces of resistance. One thing was certain: they had come too far to stop now. The days had begun to blur together as Elon, Leah, and the GSC team worked tirelessly to maintain the momentum of the Green Ecosystem Initiative. Yet, even as they made significant strides, the road ahead was riddled with unexpected hurdles. Their vision for a sustainable future was becoming clearer, but achieving it would require more than just technological innovation and economic development. It would require unity, something that was proving to be much harder to achieve on a global scale. One of the most significant challenges they faced was the fractured nature of international politics. While countries in Europe, parts of North America, and certain regions of Asia were fully embracing the green revolution, others were struggling to keep pace. Some nations, whose economies had been built on fossil fuels, were resistant to change, fearing economic collapse if they embraced the green transition too quickly. Others saw it as a political power play, threatening to upset the balance of influence in global geopolitics. Elon knew that they couldn't just focus on the technology or the business case anymore. They needed to address the political divisions that were preventing true global unity. The GSC called for an emergency summit, bringing together world leaders, environmentalists, business tycoons, and activists in an effort to create a unified vision for the future. It was time to move beyond national borders and look at the bigger picture: how to make the green revolution a global endeavor that everyone could get behind. The summit was set in a neutral location, a sprawling conference center in Geneva, Switzerland. The atmosphere was tense as world leaders arrived, accompanied by their teams and advisors. Elon and Leah stood at the back of the room, quietly observing the flow of people. This meeting was crucial, but it felt like the stakes had never been higher. As the conference began, the usual suspects, politicians, corporate leaders, and environmental advocates, took their places at the table. Elon, ever the strategist, had prepared a compelling presentation on the progress of the Green Ecosystem Initiative, demonstrating the tangible benefits of sustainable economic practices. The data was there. The facts were there. But he knew that convincing these leaders to put aside their differences and come together for the greater good would take more than just facts. It would take persuasion and trust. The first few hours of the summit were a battle of egos, as political leaders traded barbs, each trying to assert their nation's dominance in the green economy. It quickly became clear that the resistance to the green transition wasn't just about the economy. It was about power and influence. Countries that had built their wealth on fossil fuels were hesitant to relinquish control over the global energy market. They feared that embracing the green revolution would cost them their standing on the world stage. In one particularly tense exchange, the president of a major oil-exporting nation argued, "This green transition might work for you in the West, but it's not practical for us. Our economy is built on oil. How can you expect us to give that up overnight? You want us to sacrifice everything for an uncertain future?" Elon, who had been quiet up until this point, stood and addressed the room. "We're not asking you to give up everything," he said. "What we're offering is a new way forward. A way to create jobs, to diversify economies, and to ensure that your country's future isn't tied to a resource that's finite. The future isn't just about oil or gas. It's about creating a new economy, one based on innovation, sustainability, and resilience. The room fell silent. Elon's words hung in the air, challenging the status quo. For the first time during the summit, there was a shift in the energy in the room. People began to look at each other differently, as if they were hearing the truth for the first time. Elon had made the argument clear. The green transition wasn't just about environmentalism. It was about survival. The world was changing, and those who didn't adapt would be left behind. Leah leaned over to Elon, whispering, "That was powerful, but it's not going to be enough. We need more." Elon nodded, understanding that this was just the beginning. Convincing the world's leaders to unite wasn't going to be easy. The deeper problem lay in overcoming the deeply rooted distrust between nations, corporations, and the people who had been affected by these massive shifts. The next day, the summit turned its focus to practical solutions. Small group discussions began, where leaders brainstormed ways to transition away from fossil fuels while ensuring that economies were protected. Some of the most promising ideas came from developing nations, countries that had already begun implementing green technologies and were eager to share their experiences. They had seen firsthand the economic benefits of renewable energy, and they were eager to help others transition as well. But even as the summit's discussions moved toward a more cooperative tone, the tension between political and economic interests remained palpable. It became clear that one of the most difficult obstacles was the challenge of balancing short-term economic stability with the long-term benefits of a green economy. Many leaders were afraid that the transition would hurt their countries in the short run and that they would face political backlash from their citizens. Elon knew that they couldn't afford to wait. The window for action was closing fast. But as the discussions continued, a new possibility emerged. What if they could leverage the very tools of capitalism, corporate investments, market forces, and competitive innovation to accelerate the green transition? If they could get private sector companies to lead the charge, governments would follow suit. The GSC launched a new initiative called Capitalism for Change, a program designed to incentivize corporations to invest in green technologies and sustainable practices. Elon knew that business could move faster than government, and he was determined to show the world that the green revolution wasn't just a political issue. It was an economic one. Tesla, SpaceX, and other companies in the GSC coalition would serve as models for innovation. They would show the world that it was possible to make profit and lead the charge on sustainability at the same time. The idea was simple. If corporations could prove that going green wasn't just a moral imperative, but also a profitable venture, then others would follow suit. But this approach came with its own set of challenges. While some corporations were eager to jump on board, others remained wary of change, fearful of the upfront investment and potential risks. Elon and the GSC team worked tirelessly to show that green innovation could provide both economic and environmental benefits. Slowly but surely, more companies began to see the potential, and the program gained traction. Months passed, and the global awakening was beginning to take shape. The summit had sparked a shift, a recognition that the green revolution couldn't be won by any one nation or sector alone. It had to be a global effort, one built on cooperation, trust, and mutual benefit. Elon had known from the start that the revolution wouldn't be easy, but the world was starting to see that the future was inextricably linked to sustainability. As the green transition gained momentum, the divisions between countries and industries began to fade. Leaders who had once resisted change now became allies. Corporations that had been reluctant to invest in green technologies began to lead the charge. And the world, for the first time, was beginning to come together for a common cause. As the global awakening took hold, there was a growing sense of optimism among the GSC members and the people who had embraced the green revolution. Elon, Leah, and the entire team watched as cities across the world shifted toward renewable energy, electric vehicles became a common sight, and the environmental damage caused by decades of industrialization began to show signs of reversal. Yet, for every step forward, there seemed to be an equal amount of resistance, and the battle for a sustainable future was far from over. The turning tide was evident in the political arena. As the global momentum built, a vocal minority of critics began to emerge, particularly from industries that stood to lose the most. Fossil fuel corporations, coal mining conglomerates, and countries that were heavily reliant on oil exports had begun to push back against the new wave of change. They decried the Green Revolution as a threat to their livelihoods, arguing that the world wasn't ready for a massive transition and that the risks were too high. Elon knew this resistance wasn't just a minor obstacle. It was a battle for the future of the planet. For the first time since the launch of his green vision, Elon found himself questioning whether they could truly unite the world behind this movement. As each new piece of legislation aimed at reducing carbon emissions was rolled back or delayed, the fear that the revolution might stall began to grow. One afternoon, Elon and Leah were sitting in the command center of SpaceX, reviewing the latest market analysis of their renewable energy ventures. The numbers were strong, with Tesla's electric cars and SolarCity's solar panels reaching record adoption rates. Yet, as they glanced through the global reports, a dark reality became clear. "It's happening," Leah said quietly, pointing to the data on the screen. "Look at these numbers. Some of the largest oil-exporting countries are defunding green initiatives and scaling back on their environmental goals. And worse yet, there are countries with major economic ties to these industries that are starting to do the same. It's like we're losing ground, Elon." Elon rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of the situation. "We knew this was coming. When the stakes are this high, there's bound to be resistance. But if we back down now, everything we've built will collapse. We can't afford to lose the momentum." Leah nodded, her eyes narrowing as she scrolled through the news. "There are protests now. People who are angry about the job losses in the coal and oil sectors. They're calling for a halt to all new green energy projects. It's spreading fast, especially in places where people feel like they've been left behind." The resistance wasn't just from industry giants or political leaders. There were real people, workers, families, and communities who had built their lives around fossil fuel industries. In many ways, these individuals felt like pawns in a larger geopolitical game. Their livelihoods were at stake, and they saw the Green Revolution as an existential threat to their way of life. Elon's thoughts drifted to the workers in the oil fields of Texas, the coal miners in Appalachia, and the fishermen whose communities had relied on oil drilling for decades. Their frustrations were understandable. The rapid pace of change had left them feeling abandoned, even betrayed. Their jobs were disappearing, and the promises of new green jobs hadn't always materialized in the way they had hoped. The question of how to balance progress with the needs of these communities loomed larger than ever. Elon had always been driven by a sense of urgency, but he now found himself grappling with the complexity of the human cost of this revolution. In an effort to address this growing resistance, Elon called for a series of town halls and listening sessions across key regions where the backlash was strongest. These were not meant to be one-sided speeches about the benefits of green energy. Instead, they were meant to create a space where people could voice their concerns and feel heard. It was time to acknowledge the sacrifices of those who had worked in traditional industries for generations. The first town hall took place in a small town in West Virginia, a coal mining hub that had seen better days. Elon arrived with a team of experts, hoping to make an impact by showing the people that the Green Revolution could be their future, too. As he took the stage in front of the crowd, the atmosphere was tense. The local miners, their families, and community members stood with arms crossed, waiting for Elon to speak. "Thank you for allowing me to be here today," Elon began, his voice calm but resolute. "I know this transition hasn't been easy, and I understand that many of you feel uncertain about what the future holds. But I want to make one thing clear. This revolution is not just about technology, it's about people. It's about creating a world where no one is left behind." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people were skeptical, others hopeful, but all of them were listening. Elon continued, "I want to assure you that we're not here to replace you. We're here to provide new opportunities, new ways for you to succeed in a world that is changing. I know that the jobs in renewable energy may seem distant right now, but the future we're building is one where everyone has a place. We want to help you transition to new industries, to provide the training, the jobs, and the support you need to make sure that no one is left behind." The room was quiet, and for a moment, Elon wasn't sure if he had made an impact. But then, an older man from the back of the room stood up. He was gruff, his face worn by years of hard labor, but his voice was steady. "You're telling us we can just switch jobs? that we can all suddenly become engineers or technicians. It's not that easy. We've been mining these hills for generations. This is our home. This is all we know. How can you expect us to just walk away from it? Elon nodded, his expression understanding. I hear you. And I'm not here to tell you it's easy. What I'm saying is that we're in this together. We want to make sure that as the world moves forward, we don't leave anyone behind. The green economy is real, and the jobs are real. But we need to work with you, your communities, your leaders, to make sure that the future you're building is one you can be a part of. The man stared at Elon for a long time before sitting back down. There was still a palpable sense of skepticism in the air, but Elon could feel the shift. It was a small step forward, a crack in the wall of resistance. In the months that followed, similar town halls took place across the nation, each one filled with passionate discussions about the green transition. Some communities were more receptive than others, but slowly, the message was getting through. This wasn't just a global movement. It was a movement for every person, in every corner of the world. Elon and his team worked relentlessly, collaborating with local governments, unions, and community leaders to ensure that job retraining programs were put in place. They focused on creating partnerships with private companies to fund these initiatives, so that workers from traditional industries could transition into roles in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and green manufacturing. Despite the setbacks, the turning tide was becoming clear. The resistance wasn't as strong as it had once seemed. Communities that felt abandoned were beginning to see hope in the green future. As Elon looked back on the progress they had made, he realized that the real challenge wasn't the technology, it was the people. It had always been about them. The green revolution would only succeed if it was built on the foundation of trust, inclusivity, and understanding. The resistance was not just a challenge to overcome. It was a call to action, a reminder that the path to a better world required patience, empathy, and above all, a commitment to ensuring that no one was left behind. The world was in the midst of transformation, but the final push, the final step toward a new global order, was upon them. Despite the growing acceptance of the Green Revolution, the resistance still loomed large, particularly from entrenched industries and political forces that stood to lose from the changes. Elon, Leah, and the GSC team knew they had come a long way, but the fight was far from over. The stakes had never been higher, and the pressure to succeed was mounting. It wasn't just about economic growth anymore. It was about survival. The world needed this revolution, and it needed it now. With the climate crisis reaching an irreversible tipping point, the time for slow progress had passed. Governments around the world, while beginning to embrace green policies, were still bogged down in bureaucracy and political gridlock. It was clear that, to truly win this battle, they needed to break through the inertia and make the green economy not just desirable but inevitable. In the months that followed the town halls, Elon and Leah continued to build momentum through strategic partnerships and public outreach. Elon spent countless hours engaging with government leaders, corporate moguls, and grassroots activists, ensuring that the green revolution became a shared mission. But it was the private sector that had truly begun to lead the charge, as corporations like Tesla, SpaceX, and others in the GSC coalition invested heavily in green technologies. They were proving that sustainability didn't just make sense from an environmental perspective, it made sense from an economic one, too. Leah was especially focused on working with local leaders to provide community-based solutions. She understood that while global policies were crucial, real change needed to come from the ground up. In the Rust Belt cities of the U.S. and the coal mines of Appalachia, she worked to ensure that workers weren't left behind, creating job retraining programs that prepared them for the green jobs of tomorrow. Yet, despite the progress, the fight for the planet's future was not without setbacks. The last resistance came from a surprising front: climate skeptics in the form of populist movements that had gained ground in the past few years. These movements rejected the green transition, instead championing the status quo. Fossil fuels, nationalism, and a return to the glory days of unregulated capitalism. Their rhetoric appealed to people who felt marginalized by the rapid pace of globalization and the changing political landscape. Elon and Leah knew that to overcome this final hurdle, they needed a message that resonated not just with the elite, but with the average person, too. They had already won over the innovators, the environmentalists, and the business leaders, but now it was time to speak directly to the masses. It was time for a campaign that united people from all walks of life, people who had been left out of the conversation for too long. In the wake of rising political opposition, Elon decided to launch a global campaign called Future Now. The campaign aimed to highlight the urgency of the climate crisis and position the green transition as not just a political or corporate issue, but a human one. The tagline of the campaign was simple but powerful: "The future can't wait." The campaign would be run through social media, traditional media, and grassroots efforts, focusing on real-world stories of individuals and families who had embraced the green revolution. It was designed to show that the green economy wasn't just an abstract concept. It was tangible, it was here, and it was creating real jobs, real opportunities, and real benefits for everyday people. The campaign launched with a viral video featuring individuals from around the world sharing their stories. There was Maria, a single mother in Brazil, who had switched from working in an oil refinery to becoming a solar panel installer. There was Mark, a former coal miner in Kentucky, now training to be a wind turbine technician. There was May, a farmer in China, who had turned her fields into a sustainable agroecology project that not only saved her farm but improved the local ecosystem. As the stories spread, people began to see the green revolution in a new light. It wasn't about losing jobs, it was about gaining a future. People who had once been skeptical of the green transition began to understand that it wasn't a luxury for the privileged, it was a necessity for survival. And for the first time, the green revolution felt like a shared mission for everyone. But even as the Future Now campaign gained traction, the political resistance didn't disappear. In the halls of government, the populist movements began to fight back, arguing that the green transition was an elitist scheme to destroy jobs and drive up costs for ordinary people. They rallied against new green policies, portraying them as attacks on the working class. Elon knew this battle was going to be long, and he didn't have the luxury of waiting. The Earth was running out of time. The window for action was closing. In a bold move, he decided to address the world directly, broadcasting a live, global address that would be streamed in every major country. It was time to cut through the noise and speak plainly about the urgency of the situation. The evening of the address, Elon stood before the cameras, his usual confident demeanor tempered by the gravity of the message he was about to deliver. Leah, standing behind him, offered a quiet word of encouragement, but even she understood how high the stakes were. This wasn't just another speech, it was a call to action. "Good evening, world," Elon began, his voice calm but firm. "I'm speaking to you tonight because the time for hesitation is over. We've come far in our efforts to build a sustainable future, but the truth is simple. The climate crisis is here, and it's accelerating. Our future is on the line. The future of our children, our communities, and our planet." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. There are those who will tell you that we cannot afford this transition, that it's too risky, too costly. But I tell you, the real risk is doing nothing. The real cost is inaction. The cost of waiting is measured in floods, wildfires, droughts, and the loss of entire ecosystems. And yes, it will be difficult. But the future is not something we can wait for. It is something we must create. Together. As the address aired worldwide, the reactions were immediate. Social media exploded with both support and backlash. In some countries, the speech sparked a wave of support from the public, with people demanding action from their governments. In others, it fueled the populist opposition, who framed it as a corporate takeover disguised as a noble cause. But no matter the reaction, one thing was clear. The conversation had shifted. For the first time, the Green Revolution was no longer just a niche movement or an elite project. It had become a global issue, a moral imperative. The resistance was still there, but it was losing ground. The next few months would see the world's leaders forced to take decisive action. The political pressure was mounting, and leaders who had once hesitated now found themselves on the defensive. Some countries, particularly those in Europe and North America, passed sweeping green energy reforms, while others began to adopt stricter carbon regulations. The green transition had become a new global reality. It was no longer about whether the world would embrace renewable energy, but how fast they could scale it. In the end, Elon knew that the green revolution would not be a perfect journey. There would always be setbacks, opposition, and mistakes along the way. But the revolution had gained momentum, and with it, hope. The road was long, but the destination was clear. A future where the planet thrived, where people had good jobs, and where humanity had made the right choice, not just for themselves, but for the generations that would follow. It was the year 2035, and the world had undergone a transformation. The climate crisis, though far from over, had slowed its relentless advance. The Green Revolution, once a bold vision, was now the foundation of a new global economy. The effort spearheaded by Elon Musk and his team had paid off, but the journey had been anything but easy. It had been a decade of struggle, resistance, hope, and eventual triumph. Elon stood in front of the massive glass windows of SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California, looking out at the skyline below. The air was clearer now, and the sky above was free of the haze that had once choked it. The revolution was not just in the fields of energy and technology, it was in the very way the world had come to understand its place on Earth. Leah walked in quietly, her presence bringing with it the calm reassurance that Elon always sought in moments like this. The world had changed, and she had been by his side through every pivotal moment. Together, they had fought to ensure that the vision they had worked so hard for was realized. But this moment, was different. It was the culmination of a decade's worth of dreams, struggles, and sacrifices. "It's hard to believe, isn't it?" Leah said softly, joining him at the window. Elon didn't immediately respond, his mind wandering back to the early days. The late nights spent in planning rooms, the endless presentations to skeptical investors, the pushback from entrenched industries. There had been times when he wasn't sure they could pull it off. But now, the results were undeniable. The Earth was healing, and humanity had started its journey to living in harmony with nature. "It feels like it's just beginning," Elon said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "The fight has changed. We've won some battles, but the real work is just starting. The revolution never really ends, Leah." She smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. The transition to a green economy had started, but it was a process that would continue to evolve for generations. The work they had done was monumental, but there were still challenges ahead. The world was still facing the aftermath of environmental damage, economic inequality, and geopolitical tensions. The green transition had created a more sustainable world, but there were always new problems to address. A few weeks later, in an important ceremony held at the United Nations headquarters, global leaders gathered to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Global Sustainability Coalition's first groundbreaking summit. The world had made great strides in tackling climate change, and the fruits of their collective efforts were evident. Emissions had dropped by more than 50%, and renewable energy now powered more than 70% of the world's population. Countries once dependent on fossil fuels had transitioned to green technologies, and green jobs had flourished in all corners of the world. Elon stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of leaders, activists, scientists, and citizens from every continent. It was a new world order, one that had been built on the shoulders of millions of people who had fought for a better future. He had always believed in the power of technology to shape the world, but this was different. This wasn't just about innovation. It was about people, communities, and the planet. "We've done it," Elon began, his voice steady. "But we haven't just saved the planet. We've rewritten the story of humanity. 10 years ago, we stood at the brink. Today, we stand on the precipice of an even brighter future." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in. The people in the room had worked tirelessly for this, and Elon felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for each and every one of them. They had pushed past obstacles, united despite their differences, and created a world where humanity could truly thrive. This revolution, this green revolution, is not about eliminating industries or putting people out of work, Elon continued. It's about creating a future where everyone has a place where jobs are sustainable, where economies are circular, and where the next generation will inherit a world that is not just habitable, but flourishing. The speech was met with thunderous applause, a wave of recognition for the monumental progress that had been achieved. But Elon knew that despite the celebration, there was still work to do. The green transition wasn't over. It was just the beginning. While the planet had already begun to recover, they still had to build an equitable world where wealth was shared, resources were managed sustainably, and no one was left behind. Leah, sitting in the front row, caught Elon's eye. She gave him a subtle nod, and he smiled in return. They had done it. They had changed the world. In the years that followed, Elon continued to push the boundaries of what was possible. SpaceX's ambitions had expanded beyond Mars to the outer reaches of the solar system, where new technologies would be developed to ensure the long-term survival of humanity. Tesla's vehicles and energy products continued to dominate the market, driving a massive reduction in global carbon emissions. The Hyperloop, once a futuristic concept, was now operational, linking cities in a matter of hours and cutting down on fossil fuel consumption. SolarCity's projects had not only provided renewable energy to millions, but it helped entire regions become energy self-sufficient. The GSC, now a global powerhouse, had helped usher in a new era of collaboration between governments, businesses, and citizens. It was a testament to the power of collective action. The old world, one where exploitation and short-term thinking had ruled the day, had faded into history. And in its place was a world where sustainability and compassion were the cornerstones of society. And yet, in the quiet moments when Elon reflected on all that had been achieved, he understood one thing more clearly than ever before. The revolution had never been about him. It had always been about the people, the workers, the innovators, the dreamers, and the everyday citizens who had taken the leap with him. They had created this future together. Elon Musk's legacy would not just be measured in the technologies he had created, but in the lives he had touched, the communities he had uplifted, and the earth he had saved. He had shown the world that a better future wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. As the sun began to set on another day, casting a golden glow over the transformed world, Elon looked out at the horizon. The green revolution had taken root, but the seeds of a new era had only just begun to sprout. A world built on love, sustainability, and shared responsibility for the Earth's future. This was the world that had been born. And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt that the fight had been worth it. The revolution was not over. It had only just begun. And the future, as uncertain as it was, held the promise of a new world. One that humanity would continue to shape together.